Chapter 2191. Bone Ladder. Zhuowen looked at the 9 people and said coldly, "What? It's my freedom to pick the 7-headed bone flower. What does it have to do with you? If you want to show your loyalty, you can pick it yourself. Why do you want me to do it?" The 9 people looked at each other, and the leader sneered, "This is the chief's order. If he wants you to pick it, you have to pick it. Get in, or the sword has no eyes." Zhuowen's eyes darkened. This person dared to threaten him in public. He really didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. "So what if I don't go?" Zhuowen calmed down and said indifferently, "I said, the sword has no eyes. Capture this kid and tie him up. Today, he has to go even if he doesn't want to." After the leader finished speaking, he rushed in front of Zhuowen. His right hand formed a claw and grabbed at Zhuowen's neck, not showing any mercy. Although this move was not fatal, it could lock the throat and make the enemy feel extremely uncomfortable. Zhuowen's eyes turned cold, and he stepped back with his right foot. However, the people behind him all drew their weapons and slashed at Zhuowen's back. Obviously, if Zhuowen really retreated, he would have to bear the brunt of their attacks. Zhuowen's eyes turned even colder, and he immediately summoned the black-clothed Zhuowen. The black-clothed Zhuowen waved his left hand, and the energy of extreme fire swept out. The weapons in the hands of the 9 people were all melted into nothingness, and they hurriedly retreated because of the high temperature. With the black-clothed Zhuowen's strength, killing these 9 people was easy, but Zhuowen knew that these 9 people were ordered by the dead spirit, so they didn't deserve to die. The 9 people were scared silly. They knew how hard the bone weapons were, but the black-clothed Zhuowen melted them in an instant. It was too terrifying. Scram! Zhuowen no longer paid any attention to these 9 people and continued forward. His purpose in entering the corpse heaven path was to see the king and leave this damned place. Naturally, he couldn't waste time here. "Let's go and report to the chief," the man in the lead said, and immediately led the 8 people back the way they came. Zhuowen passed through the world of skeletons again, and what appeared in front of him was a sky-reaching bone ladder. This bone ladder was countless times more majestic than the one used to enter the path of bones. It could be said that this bone ladder was built from the bones of a general. Zhuowen hadn't even stepped onto the bone ladder yet, but he could already feel the mournful aura coming from it. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He could sense that this bone staircase wasn't simple. It might even be dangerous, so he put his true body away and let the black-robed Zhuowen come out. Now, only the black-clothed Zhuowen's strength wouldn't be suppressed. In this dangerous corpse heaven's road, Zhuowen naturally wouldn't let his main body take the risk. Although Zhuowen hadn't encountered any danger since the beginning of the journey to Myriad Head Cave, he knew that it was because of the undead. This undead gave Zhuowen a sense of mystery that he couldn't see through. To be more precise, it was a sense of crisis. The following road should be completely out of the undead's control. It would definitely be full of danger. The moment he stepped on the bone ladder, Zhuowen immediately felt a heavy pressure pressing down on his body. Phew. Fortunately, I put my true body away. Such a terrifying pressure, my true body can't stand it. Zhuowen's eyes were solemn. This pressure was definitely not something an ordinary person could bear. His true body, which had lost its divine power, would definitely be seriously injured under this pressure. Walking up step by step, Zhuowen's pace was extremely steady. When Zhuowen stepped onto the real corpse heaven path, the 9 people had already returned to the Bone Halberd tribe along the original path. What about Zhuowen? In the square, the undead looked at the 9 people with gloomy eyes and asked coldly. The 9 of them kept quiet out of fear. The man in the lead knelt on the ground and hurriedly said, "My lord, that Zhuowen is too terrifying. He can use divine power, especially the flames he released. He turned all of our weapons into ashes." "Divine power? Are you serious?" The undead opened his eyes wide, his face full of disbelief. In the bone world, no one could use divine power. This was common knowledge for everyone in the bone world. Even he, the undead, could only rely on the power of faith to obtain great power. He didn't have any divine power. Chen Changsheng was even more surprised. He thought to himself, "Fortunately, I didn't expose myself. If that Zhuowen could really use divine power, I would have been in danger. But how did he do it? The undead snorted coldly and waved the bone staff at the man in the lead. The man in the lead immediately felt as if he was choking. He covered his neck with both hands and floated in the air. His face was incomparably red. You're lying, right? It's impossible to use divine power in the bone world. It should be because you didn't do your job well that you made up such a lie. The undead said coldly. The man kept shaking his head, indicating that he didn't lie. Unfortunately, the undead was indifferent. He waved his right hand and the man screamed and exploded into a cloud of blood mist. The remaining 8 people knelt on the ground, trembling. They didn't dare to raise their heads to look at the undead. Tell me, what happened? The undead looked at the 8 people and asked. The 8 people hurried to explain. They didn't dare to say that Zhuowen had divine power anymore. They just said that Zhuowen escaped and put all the blame on the man who was killed. The 8 of you will stay in the cage for 3 days, the undead said indifferently. The expressions of the 8 people changed greatly, but they didn't dare to refute or beg for mercy. There were many undead beasts in this beast cage. Their chances of survival were slim, but it wasn't impossible. At least, it was much better than being killed on the spot. After the 8 people were taken away, Chen Changsheng said, Master, that man didn't look like he was lying. The undead interrupted, you don't need to say more. I've lived in the bone world for so long. I know very well that divine power doesn't exist in this place. However, Zhuowen might have other powers. Chen Changsheng was enlightened. He knew that the undead should know that the man didn't say anything, but he still killed him. He didn't want to cause panic in the tribe because of him. Just think about it. If there was a special case in the skeleton world that could use divine power, how big of a disaster would that be? Very few people in the skeleton world could resist such an existence. Let's wait first. It's basically impossible to pass through the corpse heavenly road. That Zhuowen either died in the corpse heavenly road, or is afraid of going back the way he came and being captured by us. The dead spirit said indifferently. Chen Changsheng nodded and didn't say anything. He was worried and complicated. Back then, Zhuowen was just an ant in his eyes. He could crush him with one finger. Chen Changsheng didn't expect that he would be forced to such a state. Even though Zhuowen couldn't use his divine power in the skeleton world, he was still hiding some unknown power. Chen Changsheng recalled all the scenes when he met Zhuowen. He realized that he was led by the nose by the boy who was once an ant. Maybe I shouldn't have listened to Ling Binbing and went to kill Zhuowen. The Heaven and Earth sect wouldn't have been destroyed and I wouldn't have ended up like this. Chen Changsheng muttered to himself. He secretly looked at the undead beside him. He didn't dare to tell the undead that the Heaven and Earth sect was destroyed. Chapter 2192. Same race roar. 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 On the corpse heavenly road, in front of the huge bone ladder, a series of flickering figures appeared. Zhuowen stopped, and his eyes became extremely solemn. He had been on the bone ladder for 3 days. The first 3 days were fine. Except for the doubling of gravity, there were no other dangers on the bone ladder. But today, the undead appeared in front of the bone ladder, and their numbers were increasing. Zhuowen made a grasping motion with his left hand and condensed a divine sword of thunder and fire. Under the control of Zhuowen's mind, the Thunderfire Divine Sword began to split into extreme fire swords and extreme thunder swords. The 2 kinds of divine swords were densely packed around Zhuowen's body. After doing this, Zhuowen moved forward step by step, turning a blind eye to the undead that appeared in front of him. Bang! 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 As Zhuowen continued to move forward, the surrounding densely packed extreme Dao divine swords revealed a terrifying might. They danced in the sky, and all the undead that approached Zhuowen were pierced and annihilated by the extreme Dao divine swords. Zhuowen climbed the bone ladder unimpeded. His speed was not fast, but it was as steady as a mountain. In this way, Zhuowen walked on the bone ladder for another 10 days. He found that the number of undead had decreased, but he still hadn't reached the end of the bone ladder. Is there no end to this bone ladder? Zhuowen frowned slightly and murmured in a low voice. Another 5 days passed, and Zhuowen was still on the bone ladder. He couldn't see the end of the bone ladder, and the undead seemed to have disappeared without a trace, never to appear again. At this moment, Zhuowen found that it might be futile for him to continue walking. Zhuowen took a deep breath and sat cross-legged on the bone ladder, revealing a thoughtful look. The scarlet eyes that appeared in his mind and reminded him to go to the corpse heavenly road were definitely not groundless. Now that he had come to the corpse heavenly road, it didn't make sense for him to be trapped here. Maybe my method is wrong. Zhuowen frowned slightly. He recalled the scene when the pair of scarlet eyes appeared in his mind and slowly closed his eyes. About an hour later, a strange black fog began to appear around Zhuowen's body, completely concealing his figure. At this moment, the pair of scarlet eyes appeared in Zhuowen's mind once again. I've already arrived at the corpse heavenly road, but I can't find the exit. Tell me how to meet you. Zhuowen looked up at the pair of scarlet eyes and said calmly, reveal your true form and use your innate ability to devour to open the exit. The scarlet eyes only said this one sentence before slowly fading away and disappearing into the darkness. Zhuowen opened his eyes and looked at the blurry end of the bone ladder. His eyes were clear and bright. Let's try it. As he spoke, Zhuowen roared towards the sky. Shortly after, his body began to grow taller and taller. His entire body had transformed into a terrifying giant beast. This giant beast was so massive that the bone ladder was nothing compared to it. It wasn't worth mentioning. After Devour had returned to his true form, he opened his mouth and spat out a black devouring vortex. A terrifying suction force that could swallow the sky and the sea came from his mouth. Right after that, Zhuowen saw ripples appear at the end of the bone ladder. The originally blurry end gradually became much clearer at this moment. It was as if the end had been stained with dust before, and now that the dust had been absorbed, it became clearly visible. Zhuowen squinted. His right foot stomped, and Devour's giant body flew out, entering the end of the bone ladder easily. The moment Devour reached the end of the tunnel, invisible ripples arose fiercely like a stone falling into the water surface, sparkling in the light. On the other hand, Zhuowen only felt that the world was spinning. He felt dizzy and extremely uncomfortable. However, when he woke up, he found that he wasn't on the bone ladder anymore. It was a flat ground. At the front of the plain stood a majestic hall made of bones. Two giant skeletons of strange beasts stood on both sides of the hall, which looked majestic and magnificent. After Devour returned to his human form, Zhuowen became vigilant. He slowly walked to the hall in front of him. As soon as he entered the hall, he felt an ancient and vicissitude aura blowing at his face. What frightened Zhuowen more was that when the vicissitude aura hit him, Zhuowen found that the vitality in his body was gradually aging because of the resonance. Zhuowen was so scared that he immediately urged his lightning and fire energy to cover his entire body to control the influence of the aura. Just the aura alone was so terrifying, causing Zhuowen to become even more cautious. Come in. Don't be so cautious. An old voice arose from the hall, echoing in Zhuowen's ears. It was so loud that even the deaf could hear it. Zhuowen's heart clenched, but he was hesitant. This bone hall was so strange. The people who could live in this hall weren't ordinary. Perhaps, the owner of this voice was the king of the skeleton world. Clansman, I think you've guessed my identity. Why are you still so afraid? Come in. The aged voice resounded once more, and its tone was filled with an indisputable tone. A pressure that caused Zhuowen's heart to tremble abruptly crushed down. This pressure was so intimidating that it made Zhuowen's heart beat fast. He had to force himself to enter the hall. Zhuowen's knowledge wasn't bad, but this pressure was beyond his expectation. It was much stronger than Old Ruthless. Although this pressure wasn't as strong as Great Brahma, it wasn't much different. Zhuowen knew that the owner of this voice wasn't a formidable existence at Void Sky 9 steps, but he wasn't far from it. Moreover, from what this man had just said, he should be Devour. He considered Zhuowen as one of his clansmen. Deep inside the hall, there was nothing. Green flames were burning around, making the hall dark and gloomy. A chessboard was placed in an open space in the depths of the hall. A figure with disheveled hair was sitting at one end of the chessboard, seriously looking at the game on the chessboard. His brows were tightly knitted, as if he was thinking about how to break the game on the chessboard. Zhuowen stood on the other side of the chessboard, looking at the sloppy man in silence. However, he didn't say anything. "Come here, kid. Sit in front of me." The sloppy man waved his right hand, and a hassock appeared on the chessboard. The man lifted his head to look at Zhuowen, pointing at the hassock. However, when the man lifted his head, Zhuowen's pupils shrank. This was an extremely terrifying face. The surface of the face was covered with intersecting veins and blood vessels. Moreover, these veins were constantly wriggling like worms. It was very disgusting to look at. Zhuowen's willpower wasn't bad. However, as it was the first time he saw this face, he couldn't help but be surprised. Chapter 2193. The chessboard and the pieces. The chain was black with a hint of golden light. It looked inconspicuous, but Zhuowen could tell that it was extraordinarily tough and terrifyingly tough. In particular, the man in front of him looked ordinary, but Zhuowen did not really treat him as an ordinary man. After all, the man's words earlier had affected him, so he was definitely not a simple person. At that moment, Zhuowen's attention was also on the chessboard. On the chessboard, the black and white pieces were arranged in a crisscrossing manner like two black and white dragons. They were fighting with each other, and the situation was extremely delicate and intense. Although Zhuowen did not play chess much, he had seen others play chess before, so he knew a thing or two about the situation. In the game, on the surface, the black pieces had the upper hand and were forcing the white pieces to make a fool of themselves. The situation was very good. However, Zhuowen could tell that something was wrong. Although the white pieces seemed to be forced to retreat and the situation was critical, they were still not taken down by the black pieces. Moreover, due to the black pieces' fierce attacks, their flaws were gradually revealed. It seemed like the black pieces had the upper hand, but in reality, the black pieces were in danger, and the situation was extremely delicate. The sloppy man held a black piece and looked at the chessboard with a smile. "Young one, you look like you know the art of chess too? I don't really understand. However, I can still understand the direction of the chess game," Zhuowen said indifferently. The sloppy man laughed and asked, "Young one, do you think winning or losing in a game of chess is important? I dare not judge whether it's important or not. Different people have different opinions on this matter, and no one can say for sure." Zhuowen shook his head. The sloppy man laughed heartily. He looked up and looked seriously at Zhuowen. "You're right. Winning or losing is different for everyone. Look at this game of chess. What do you see?" Zhuowen frowned. He looked at the chessboard in front of him seriously and said, "Life." The sloppy man was startled, then he laughed and said, "Interesting. Your answer is really interesting. Tell me, what does this game of chess have to do with life?" Zhuowen, however, was neither happy nor sad. He said, "Senior, what good will it do for me if I tell you this?" The sloppy man's laughter grew louder and louder, not showing any anger at Zhuowen's words. He pointed at Zhuowen's withered right arm and said, "I can help you extract the death aura of the seven-headed bone flower." Zhuowen's gaze shook, and he hurriedly asked, "Is that true?" The sloppy man smiled and said, "Of course I'm serious. Now, tell me. If I'm satisfied with what you say, how difficult would it be for me to help you dissolve the death aura?" Zhuowen calmed the excitement in his heart. This death chi had troubled him all along the way. Moreover, he noticed that as time passed, the death chi became denser and denser, and it showed signs of breaking through the seal on his right arm. Zhuowen knew that if he didn't get rid of the death chi, it would really endanger his life. Now that he heard that this person could dissolve the death aura, how could Zhuowen not be excited? Zhuowen looked at the chessboard thoughtfully. At the same time, he recalled everything that had happened since he started as a lowly person and cultivated step by step to his current level, and the light of understanding in his eyes grew thicker and thicker. Zhuowen was not old, but he had experienced a lot of things. He was probably comparable to those old monsters who had cultivated for countless years. Life is like a game of chess, and we are like chess pieces. Under the chessboard of heaven and earth, we walk a fixed path step by step. There are obstacles and difficulties, but the final result is victory or defeat. However, in my opinion, true victory or defeat is not the game of chess, but the victory that belongs to us. Some people win the game of chess, but lose their lives. Some people lose the game of chess, but win their lives. However, true victory is in our own hands. Not submitting to fate, not being satisfied with the status quo, and constantly moving forward, stepping out of the universe with the body of an ant. That is true victory. Don't let drama disturb true feelings. Let fate decide, and I will win. After the battle, the two pieces are white and black. How can one lose? The true winner can leave the game of chess and truly control their own fate. Those who cannot control their own fate are still losers even if they win against the enemy in the game of chess. Zhuowen's voice grew louder and louder, like a great bell, enlightening even the deaf. The sloppy man's eyes shone brightly, but he laughed aloud. Not bad at all. Let fate decide, and I will win. That's a good thing. However, as a chess piece, do you really think you can control your own fate? The sloppy man suddenly asked in a deep voice. Zhuowen thought of the situation on the heavenly armor planet. The bet between Tai Ching and Sakyamuni. In that bet, all the living beings on the heavenly armor planet, including Zhuowen, were chess pieces. However, Zhuowen still managed to control his own fate in the end. He rushed out of the heavenly armor planet and entered the boundless starry sky, cultivating to his current powerful cultivation. Yes. Nothing is absolute in this world, Zhuowen said seriously. The sloppy man sank into deep thought. Before long, the sloppy man smiled. His entire presence changed as well. He seemed to have become more determined and confident. Young man, I'm very satisfied with what you said. There are some things that you need to stick to. Nothing is absolute, and there is no absolute victory or defeat. After the sloppy man said that with a smile, he quietly placed the black piece in his hand on the chessboard. The crisp sound produced by the chess pieces constantly reverberated in Zhuowen's ears. The entire chessboard shone with scorching white light. The gloomy interior of the hall glowed with new light. It was no longer as lifeless as before. Instead, it was filled with life. Zhuowen looked at the chessboard again. He discovered that the black piece had eaten the white piece's dragon, completely cutting off the white piece's chance to counterattack. Senior, who are you? Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and asked the sloppy man. The sloppy man smiled. Haven't you guessed my identity? I think I made myself clear outside the hall, right? You're the king of the skeleton world? Zhuowen asked in a low voice. The sloppy man nodded, not denying it. Is your real body also Devour? Zhuowen asked again. The sloppy man smiled. To be exact, I'm not Devour. I'm King Devour, the Devour with the royal bloodline. Whether it's status or strength, I'm much higher than an ordinary Devour. King Devour? Zhuowen's eyes shrank. It was the first time he had heard about this so-called King Devour. However, he knew that this King Devour should be much stronger than Devour. You don't know anything about it. The sloppy man frowned, asking suspiciously. Zhuowen rubbed his nose awkwardly and said, Senior, I've been wandering in the starry sky since I was a child, so I don't know much. I hope you don't mind. Chapter 2194. Unknown Secrets. Zhuowen's mind flickered. He thought that Devour had a clan, and this sloppy man called him King Devour. Was he the king of Devour's clan? However, if he was the king of Devour's clan, why did he appear in the skeleton world? From the looks of it, this Devourer king seemed to have been sealed here. Precursor, can you tell me more about the clan? Asked Zhuowen all of a sudden. Although Zhuowen's body was a human, after he had possessed Devour, he had inherited some of Devour's emotions. Although the members of Devour's clan were cold, their emotions of returning to their roots were the same in every clan. Zhuowen's body controlled Devour. With Zhuowen's thoughts, of course, he wouldn't return to Devour's clan. However, it wasn't impossible for him to ask about Devour's clan. He also wanted to know what Devour's clan was like. The sloppy man sighed. I used to be the king of my clan. However, after I was replaced by a new king, I was expelled from the devouring world. That new king didn't let me go. He sealed me in this place. This skeleton world is my body. Zhuowen revealed a look of understanding. As the king of the devouring clan, This sloppy man's devouring power was definitely above all other devourers. This bone world was created by this devouring king. That was why this bone world could absorb divine power and deprive the cultivators who entered the bone world of their powers. I don't know much about the current situation of my clan. However, I can tell you about the things that happened when I was the king. The sloppy man looked like he was recalling the past. Then, he began to tell Zhuowen everything about the devouring world. After the sloppy man finished, Zhuowen had a basic understanding of the devouring world. The devouring world was a small world. Of course, it was smaller than the 8 heavens. However, it was much more tenacious and secretive than the 8 heavens. Moreover, even King Devour didn't know Devour's exact location because the location of the devouring world wasn't fixed. It was said that the key to open the devouring world was Devour's blood essence. Devour wasn't strong enough, so he couldn't open the gate of the devouring world. Moreover, there weren't many devours in the devouring world, but each of them was powerful and earth-shaking. Junior, your current strength isn't bad. However, opening the devouring world is still a bit difficult. Moreover, you haven't fully matured yet. I'm afraid it's not possible for you to return to the devouring world now. The sloppy man looked at Zhuowen, who was deep in thought, and reminded him faintly. Zhuowen nodded. From the sloppy man's words, he knew that Devour was as strong as an ordinary Void Sky 9 Steps expert. In other words, his clone Devour needed to have the strength of a Void Sky 9 Steps expert to open the devouring world. Of course, although Devour had a unique innate gift, not every Devour could cultivate to be that strong. In the Devouring clan, as Devour could compare to Void Sky 9 times, he was absolutely an expert of the Devouring clan. It was said that the Devour King was an existence that stood above all Devours. He was a terrifying existence that was closest to breaking through the heavens. Although the sloppy man's words were vague, Zhuowen caught some clues. It seemed that in the ancient times of the Devouring clan, the strongest Devour King had appeared. The Devour King of that generation was said to have reached the supreme realm of breaking through the heavens. Of course, Zhuowen wanted to ask about the mighty Devour King. However, the sloppy man seemed to be afraid of something, so he kept his mouth shut. Senior, if the Devouring clan is so strong, why didn't they invade the 8 heavens? Zhuowen asked all of a sudden. The sloppy man sneered and said, Junior, you underestimate the 8 heavens too much. Heaven-breaking sources exist in the 8 heavens. These heaven-breaking sources don't appear casually. You mean that the human clan has a heaven-breaking expert? Why don't the 8 heavens have any records about it? Zhuowen was surprised. The sloppy man said indifferently, there has indeed been a heaven-breaking expert in the human clan. As for why the human clan doesn't have any records about it, I'm not too sure. However, I'm the Devour King of the previous generation, so I know the history of the Devour clan very well. In the ancient times, the devouring world was invaded by a heaven-breaking expert of the human clan. Because of this, the devouring clan suffered a great loss. This is the humiliation of the devouring clan. The records are very clear. Zhuowen was shocked. Since there had been a heaven-breaking expert in the human clan, why didn't he know anything about it? No one in the 8 heavens had ever mentioned it. In the 8 heavens, he had heard the most that there were no heaven-breaking experts in the human clan. There were even some rumors that said that there had never been a heaven-breaking expert in the human clan. Zhuowen knew that rumors were just rumors. He didn't know the truth. The sloppy man was right. If there had never been a heaven-breaking expert in the 8 heavens, why did each heavens contain a heaven-breaking origin? Moreover, there was a rumor that when the 8 heaven-breaking origins were gathered together, they could break through the void sky realm and advance to the heaven-breaking realm. These rumors weren't groundless. Moreover, if the human race had heaven-crushing cultivators, then where had these heaven-crushing cultivators gone? The Void Sky 9 Ascensions was the comprehension of life and death. It was an existence that had transcended life and death. It was an existence that had the same lifespan as this galaxy and could live for an extremely long time. There was no need to talk about heaven-breaking experts. They were already invincible existences. What existence in this galaxy could kill a heaven-breaking expert? Logically speaking, heaven-crushing elites should still exist. However, why had all of them disappeared without a trace? Could it be that there was some secret in this galaxy? Zhuowen's brows furrowed. He hadn't been in the 8 heavens for long. Although he had come into contact with many experts, Zhuowen hadn't come into contact with a true expert. According to Zhuowen's speculation, perhaps the secrets of the 8 heavens were hidden in the hands of the rulers of the 8 heavens. Even the strongest of the 10 great sects of the Great Brahma domain, the Half-Moon Palace, probably didn't know the true secrets of the 8 heavens. The Great Brahma domain, the Great Pure One, and the others definitely know the true secret. Zhuowen muttered inwardly. If he hadn't met the sloppy man, Zhuowen wouldn't have known that the devouring world still existed and that the 8 heavens weren't as simple as they seemed on the surface. Moreover, apart from devour, Zhuowen had also heard of the dragon clan in the 8 heavens. It was said that the dragon clan was even rarer and more powerful than devour. Only now did Zhuowen realize that he was like a frog at the bottom of a well. He really didn't know anything about the true history of the 8 heavens. However, Zhuowen knew that he couldn't be blamed. After all, he had cultivated for too short a time and advanced too quickly. Therefore, he didn't have the time to come into contact with the true history of the heavens. Chapter 2195. 9-cycle reincarnation array. Alright, let's not talk about this anymore. The human clan's affairs have nothing to do with us. The sloppy man waved his hand and looked at Zhuowen with a smile. Junior, when we were in the skeleton world, I saw that you had a human doppelganger. Can you show me your human doppelganger? Zhuowen's heart tightened. However, under this man's gaze, he knew that he had to release his real body. Although he didn't think that this sloppy man would think that the human body was his real body, he was still worried. After all, this man was the previous Devour King. Perhaps he had some unimaginable means. Thinking of this, the black-clad Zhuowen waved his sleeve. A devouring vortex appeared, and his real body appeared in front of the sloppy man, his white robe fluttering in the wind. During the process of entering the corpse heavenly road, Zhuowen didn't put his real body into the Kanglan secret realm. Instead, he put his real body into the 2 people's bodies. The sloppy man sized up Zhuowen's real body, clicking his tongue in amazement. Your real body's soul consciousness is really strong. It's definitely the strongest among all the human cultivators I've ever seen. How did you do it? Zhuowen took a deep breath and smiled. After I seized this human's body, I shared my god soul with the 2 bodies. I didn't control this human like a puppet. Senior, you know that I'm drifting outside, so I can't expose my identity. If I control this human like a puppet, I'll be exposed easily. After all, Devour is a precious species in the 8 heavens. Of course, the main god soul is in Devour. After all, this human is just my clone. The sloppy man nodded. He looked at Zhuowen's real body again and smiled. You can keep it. Now, I'll help you take out the death chi on your right arm. Give me your right hand. Zhuowen retrieved his real body. His eyes flickered, but he still extended his shriveled right hand. The sloppy man grabbed Zhuowen's right hand, and his gaze turned serious. Then, Zhuowen saw a black halo appear in the sloppy man's palm. Zhuowen was familiar with the aura of this black halo. It was the devouring power, which was much more formidable than his Devour clone. No doubt, the scruffer-looking man was much more proficient in using the devouring power than Zhuowen's Devour clone. Immediately after, Zhuowen was surprised to find that the death aura in his right arm was continuously being absorbed by the black halo in the sloppy man's hand. When all the chi of death in his right arm had been absorbed, Zhuowen's right arm was no longer shriveled. Instead, it was full of vitality and recovered to its original state. The sloppy man's gaze became increasingly solemn. With a low roar, his right hand suddenly clenched, and the black halo was crushed by him. Immediately, a grey gas rushed out from the black halo, and like a fish, it continuously swam in the air. It's the death aura. It's very powerful. If you don't want it, I will destroy it, the sloppy man said indifferently. I want it. Zhuowen answered hastily. He had personally experienced the power of the death aura. Since the sloppy man had taken it out, how could he not want it? The sloppy man nodded and didn't say anything else. His right hand spun, and a black mist shot out from his palm, covering the grey death aura. Then, the black mist wiggled and condensed into a black cube. After that, he threw the black cube to Zhuowen. I have temporarily sealed the death aura for you. If you want to use it, you can refine it. However, the refining process will be painful and difficult, the sloppy man said indifferently. Zhuowen received the black cube, clasping his hands together to thank him. Junior, you know that I purposely let you in outside the space vault, the sloppy man said all of a sudden. Zhuowen kept the black cube. His eyes flickered, and he said in a deep voice, Senior, please tell me what you need. If I can do it, I will do my best to help you. The sloppy man nodded and said, I need you to help me get out of this skeleton world. I have been trapped here for too long. I need your help. Zhuowen didn't bat an eyelid and continued, Senior, please tell me. I will do my best to help. Zhuowen didn't make full promises. After all, the sloppy man was sealed by the new generation Devourer King. The Devourer King's strength was definitely terrifying. He was at least on the same level as Taiching and Sakyamuni. With Zhuowen's current strength, he didn't believe that he had the ability to help the sloppy man get out of this sealed place. Don't worry. If you help me get out of here, I will definitely not treat you unfairly. After all, you are a junior of my clan. The sloppy man took a deep look at Zhuowen and continued, First, what you need to do is very simple. Help me kill someone. Who is it? Zhuowen asked. The chief of the Bone Halberd tribe, Sai Ling. This old fart was already a candle in the wind when he entered the skeleton world. He was already on the verge of death. However, this old fart was very lucky. He actually found this sealed place. Moreover, this old fart's array skills are also very high. He is at least an 8th level divine array master. He took advantage of the fact that this king was suppressed by the sealed place and couldn't get out. He secretly built the 9-cycle Samsara formation and built the Bone Halberd tribe around the 9-cycle Samsara formation. The 9-cycle Samsara formation was used by this old fart to absorb this king's vitality to prolong his life. I think you should have discovered it when you entered the Bone Halberd tribe. The 9-cycle Samsara formation is a peak 8th level formation. It has a very terrifying illusion technique. When the sloppy man said this, his eyes were filled with killing intent. Obviously, he was very unhappy with Sai Ling's method of absorbing his vitality. Zhuowen was surprised. He didn't expect Sai Ling to be so bold as to absorb the vitality of the king of the skeleton world. At the same time, he also remembered the illusion formation that he felt when he first entered the Bone Halberd tribe. Obviously, the illusion formation that he couldn't see through should be the 9-cycle Samsara formation that the sloppy man mentioned. Senior, since Sai Ling's array skills are so high and he's so bold, his strength must be very terrifying, right? Zhuowen said in a deep voice. The sloppy man nodded and said helplessly, Yes, this old fart is very smart. He knew that he couldn't use divine power in the skeleton world, so he figured out the power of faith. My devouring power can only devour divine power, but it can't devour the power of faith. The power of faith? Zhuowen asked in surprise. Yes, the power of faith. Regarding the king of the skeleton world, there was no such thing. After that old fart came here, he used my name to spread the news. His purpose was to make the people of the skeleton world believe in this so-called king. Moreover, this old fart had arranged a statue to collect the power of faith in the Bone Halberd tribe. That statue wasn't my image, but the old fart's. So, the king that the people of the skeleton world talked about wasn't me, but that old fart. The power of faith is illusory. I can't absorb it at all. So, I can only watch this old fart become stronger slowly. The killing intent in the sloppy man's eyes became more and more vigorous as he gritted his teeth. Zhuowen lowered his head and pondered. Then, he suddenly asked, "Senior, if this Sai Ling isn't weak, why didn't he come here to find you?" The sloppy man sneered and said, "In the skeleton world, I couldn't do anything to that Sai Ling. But here, I can kill this old fart with a flip of my hand. Moreover, with that old fart's cautious character, he won't come here. He values his life more than anyone else." Chapter 2196. Phagocytosis. Zhuowen nodded. What the sloppy man said was reasonable, so he didn't have much doubt about it. "Senior, since the undead spirit can use the power of faith, and he's a formation master, won't it be difficult for me to deal with him?" Zhuowen asked. The sloppy man shook his head and said, "Don't worry, I've already planned it out. That undead spirit mainly relies on the power of faith, and this old man has used the Bone Halberd tribe to strengthen the seal. If you don't destroy the Bone Halberd tribe's great formation, even if this king tells you how to break the formation, you won't be able to break it." Saying that, the sloppy man waved his sleeve and took out a pitch-black imperial jade seal, saying, "This is the symbol of the devouring king's status, phagocytosis. With this phagocytosis, you can be considered the king of the devouring clan. At that time, the new devouring king wanted to snatch my phagocytosis. Unfortunately, I hid it well, so that guy could only let it go. He couldn't kill me, so he could only seal me here." Zhuowen took the pitch-black imperial jade seal from the sloppy man and squinted his eyes. This imperial jade seal wasn't simple. The moment his hands touched it, he could clearly feel a thick aura of vicissitudes flowing out, making Zhuowen shiver. "There's a seal inside." Zhuowen couldn't help but ask in surprise after observing it for a while. The sloppy man nodded and said, "This phagocytosis was refined by the first devouring king. It has the mighty power of a heaven-breaking divine artifact. However, there are also 9,999 kinds of powerful seals inside. If you want to display the full power of the phagocytosis, you have to refine all 9,999 kinds of seals inside the phagocytosis." Zhuowen exclaimed in surprise. He stared at the phagocytosis in disbelief, and asked, "Is this a heaven-crushing divine tool?" However, the sloppy man waved his hand and said, "Strictly speaking, it's not a true heaven-crushing god tool, but its might surpasses that of a true heaven-crushing god tool. It's said that only by unlocking all of the 9,999 restrictions within it can one unleash the might of the heaven-crushing god tool. This is only a rumor, and I don't know if it's true." Zhuowen calmed down, but his heart was still filled with shock. Up until now, the most powerful divine tools Zhuowen had seen were secondary heaven-crushing divine tools, such as Chen Changsheng's 9 Extinction Divine Rune Sword and Fu Yu's Spatial Annihilation Meteor. The inconspicuous black jade seal in front of him was actually a terrifying weapon that was even more powerful than a phagocytosis divine artifact. Although the sloppy man couldn't be sure whether the phagocytosis divine artifact was a phagocytosis divine artifact, he could tell just how terrifying the power of the phagocytosis divine artifact was. "May I know how many restrictions Senior has refined?" Zhuowen asked tentatively. 8,999 restrictions. There are still 1,000 restrictions left. With my power, I can't refine all of them. Even so, the power of the phagocytosis divine artifact isn't weaker than a normal secondary heaven-crushing divine artifact. Moreover, the phagocytosis divine artifact isn't like a secondary heaven-crushing divine artifact. In the bone world, a secondary heaven-crushing divine artifact is just a piece of scrap iron. Without god power, it can't be used. But the phagocytosis divine artifact is different. Take the phagocytosis divine artifact, and with Devour's power, the dead soul of the Bone Halberd tribe won't be your opponent. As long as you can kill that dead soul and destroy the 9-cycle reincarnation formation, you'll have done me a great favor. The sloppy man said indifferently. Zhuowen held the phagocytosis divine artifact. He couldn't calm down for a long time. Then, he turned to the sloppy man and asked in a low voice, "Precursor, I've helped you a lot. How will you repay me?" The sloppy man pondered for a while and then smiled. "I'll help you awaken the royal bloodline." Royal bloodline? Zhuowen was surprised. The royal bloodline is King Devao's bloodline. Perhaps you don't know your situation. But I know it clearly. You have the royal bloodline. When you appeared in the space vault, I sensed it, said the sloppy man. Zhuowen was astounded. He mumbled to himself, "Precursor, you mean? I'm King Devourer too? In a sense, you're King Devourer. That's why you're much stronger than Devourer. Since you've always been away from your tribe, you don't have anyone to compare with. That's why you don't know how strong you are." The sloppy man smiled and continued, "Moreover, once you awaken the royal bloodline, your body's tenacity and innate supernatural powers will be strengthened. What do you think of this benefit?" Zhuowen pondered for a while. He remembered that when he crossed the fire, he had triggered a wisp of the Great Path's backlash. At that time, Old Ruthless had questioned his identity as a clone. No matter how strong Devourer was, he couldn't trigger the Great Path's backlash. He would just be repelled by the Starry Sky's rules. However, Zhuowen's clone wasn't just repelled by the Starry Sky. Even the Great Path had punished him. It was obvious that his clone wasn't an ordinary Devourer. It could be the Devourer with the royal bloodline that the sloppy man had mentioned. "Have you thought it through?" asked the sloppy man indifferently. "Yes, I'll help you this time," said Zhuowen in a low voice. The sloppy man laughed and said, "Good. You take the phagocytosis. I've refined 8,999 restrictions of this phagocytosis. You just need to use the devouring power to activate it. Then, it will be powerful." As he spoke, the sloppy man waved his sleeve. Immediately, Zhuowen felt as if the sky and earth were spinning around the bone hall, and waves of ripples appeared. When Zhuowen pulled himself together, he found that he was standing on the bone ladder of the corpse heavenly road. He lifted his head instinctively and found that the end of the corpse heavenly road was blurred. He couldn't see the end of the road. He knew that the sloppy man had teleported him out of the bone palace. "Junior, follow the corpse heavenly road. You can leave this place and reach the outskirts of the bone halberd tribe. After you finish your task, the phagocytosis will guide you to my place." The sloppy man's voice slowly rang out in Zhuowen's mind. It shook Zhuowen's eardrums to the point that it was deafening. Zhuowen turned around and left in an extremely straightforward manner. After walking for about 4 hours, Zhuowen walked down the corpse heavenly road. Immediately, he found that what appeared in front of him was no longer the corpse heavenly road. Chapter 2197. I offer my blood as a sacrifice. Yu Xiaohui, dressed in a blood-red dress, sized up Zhuowen and said indifferently, "You joined the Bone Halberd tribe?" Zhuowen nodded, and then he tossed a leather bag to Yu Xiaohui. The latter opened the leather bag and took a look. Soon after, she smiled charmingly and said, "All right, then come with me now." The following steps were similar to when he and Lin Shipping came in. However, when Yu Xiaohui brought him into the valley, Yu Xiaohui suddenly grabbed Zhuowen's right arm and threw Zhuowen to the ground. The 2 guards at the door quickly took out ropes and tied Zhuowen up. Zhuowen's eyes were calm and he did not resist. Instead, he looked at Yu Xiaohui and asked, "Why?" "You'll know in a moment." Yu Xiaohui smiled mysteriously and said to the 2 guards, "Take this person away." Zhuowen did not struggle. Although with his current strength, it would be easy for him to break free from the ropes, he did not do so. He thought of the situation when he and Lin Shipping came in. Comparing it to now, he felt that the treatment he and Lin Shipping received was definitely intentional. But why did the Bone Halberd tribe do that? Did they know that he, Zhuowen, was not simple? Or did they have other motives? The 2 guards quickly came to the dilapidated hut. However, there was another world inside the hut. In the middle of the hut, there was a secret passage. The 2 guards opened the secret passage and casually threw Zhuowen down. Then, they closed the entrance of the secret passage. The secret passage was slanted downwards. There were metal cylinders around it. Zhuowen fell rapidly. Zhuowen fell for a full hour. It was obvious how deep the secret passage was. When Zhuowen reached the bottom, he kicked off with his right foot and jumped up. He stood steadily on the ground. At the same time, the rope that bound his hands also broke into pieces. Patting the dust off his body, Zhuowen's gaze landed on the ground where he had landed. His expression quickly turned gloomy and murderous. The piles of corpses in front of Zhuowen were almost piled up into many small hills. There was a huge cast cave inside, which was much larger than the Bone Halberd tribe. Moreover, Zhuowen could tell at a glance that these skeletons were not the skeletons that could be found everywhere in the skeleton world, but the corpses of dead humans. Inside this cast cave, there were tens of thousands of corpses piled up like mountains. It was Zhuowen's first time seeing so many corpses. It was not an exaggeration to call it a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Suddenly, Zhuowen's ears twitched. He could vaguely hear a soft sound right in front of the cave. Zhuowen took a step forward and rushed forward. Soon, he arrived at the end of the cave. At the end of the cave, there was a bright bonfire. In front of the bonfire, more than 10 withered figures were prostrating on the ground, constantly kowtowing to the cave. I offer my blood as a sacrifice, eternal youth. I offer my blood as a sacrifice, the supreme path. I offer my blood as a sacrifice, the supreme ruler. Voices that sounded like they were talking in their sleep kept coming out of the mouths of these figures. Moreover, Zhuowen noticed that bloody wounds appeared on the bodies of these figures. Blood flowed out of the wounds and flowed towards a white statue at the end of the cave. Zhuowen's gaze landed on the white statue. He realized that the white statue was the image of the Bone Halberd tribe's chief, Sai Ling. The blood all gathered on the white statue, causing the surface of the white statue to reveal a blood-red color. As the blood continued to gather, the blood-red color of the white statue became more and more intense. Moreover, Zhuowen didn't know if it was an illusion, but he noticed that as the white statue absorbed the blood of these figures, a strange and unfathomable energy flowed out of the white statue. Zhuowen could feel this energy very clearly. This energy was different from divine power, but it was extremely powerful. Zhuowen's eyes slowly narrowed. This energy was actually not unfamiliar to Zhuowen. Back on the Heavenly Armor planet, he had come into contact with it. It was the power of faith. However, the power of faith emitted by the statue in front of him was just too powerful. The moment Zhuowen looked at the statue, he actually had the urge to worship it. It was as if as long as he worshipped this statue, he would be able to obtain all the power he wanted. He would be able to become the supreme ruler and look down on all living beings. Rumble. Suddenly, Zhuowen's mind exploded. Immediately after, a large golden hand blasted open Zhuowen's spiritual space and directly grabbed at the soul in the depths of the spiritual space. The speed of the golden hand was too fast. It actually blasted the divine soul star systems in the divine soul space into smithereens like a hot knife through butter. The intense pain caused Zhuowen to involuntarily cry out. He knelt on the ground and broke out in a cold sweat. Soul kill. Fortunately, the moment Zhuowen's spiritual space was blasted open by the large golden hand, he discovered that his consciousness could be used. He immediately used the soul kill skill. The terrifying spiritual space condensed into a murderous attack and fiercely blasted towards the large golden hand. The large golden hand, which was originally unstoppable, immediately came to a halt when the soul kill attack arrived. But soon, the large golden hand erupted with an even more powerful aura. It completely annihilated the soul kill and continued to grab at the depths of Zhuowen's spiritual space. Zhuowen's whole body broke out in cold sweat. He knew very well that as long as the large golden hand really grabbed his soul, he would probably be like the more than a dozen people kneeling on the ground. This time, the soul kill created by the peak of his spiritual space was many times more powerful than the soul kill he used in a hurry just now. Countless cracks immediately appeared on the surface of the large golden hand under the soul kill, and it was forced to retreat. However, as time passed, Zhuowen found that the power of the large golden hand was constantly increasing. It's all because of these dozen people. Zhuowen suddenly summoned Zhuowen's main body. The white-robed Zhuowen's main body took a step forward and knocked out the more than a dozen figures kneeling on the ground. Chapter 2198. Faith. After knocking those people out, Zhuowen could feel that the power of the golden hand was weakening. Soul kill. Zhuowen growled, and once again used the soul-slain method. More than 3,000 divine soul galaxies in his soul space began to churn and combine, finally condensing into a gigantic beast. The giant beast formed from the divine soul slammed into the giant golden hand. Rumble. A continuous series of explosions suddenly sounded. Soon after, the large golden hand collapsed with a loud bang. Puff. Zhuowen spat out a mouthful of blood and suddenly opened his eyes. He looked at the white statue embedded in the wall of the cave in shock. Just as Zhuowen broke through the golden hand, in the most magnificent skull cave in the center of the Bone Halberd tribe, the face of the undead sitting on the throne changed, and he involuntarily stood up. Master, what happened? Chen Changsheng, who was standing not far away, noticed the undead's strange behavior and asked in surprise. The undead's expression was ugly. His eyes flashed and he said, "The statue on the third altar is strange. I lost contact with it." Chen Changsheng was shocked. He knew a lot about the undead during this time. The Bone Halberd tribe was not used by the undead to accept people from other tribes in the bone world. It was used by the undead to increase his own strength. Below the Bone Halberd tribe, there were 9 caves. Each cave was extremely large and there were white statues of the undead placed inside. Any outsider who joined the Bone Halberd tribe would be thrown into one of the 9 caves. Then, they would be forced to worship the statue to obtain a strong power of faith. Previously, Chen Changsheng had followed the undead into the 9 caves. The scene inside could be said to be incomparably miserable, with mountains of corpses and seas of blood. Even if Chen Changsheng was experienced and knowledgeable, he was still shocked by the scene in the 9 caves. Chen Changsheng had seen the white statue at the end of the cave before. He knew how terrifying it was. When he was brought into the cave by the undead, he saw with his own eyes that a woman went crazy when she was 10 meters away from the cave. She knelt on the ground as if she was in a dream and kept kowtowing to the statue. In the end, she could not escape the fate of becoming a corpse. Later, he heard from the dead spirit that the white statue had the powerful power to break through the divine soul and grab the soul inside the divine soul. Anyone who had their soul taken away would basically worship the white statue crazily and be willing to contribute everything they had. If it were the outside world, it would not be difficult for him to capture the soul like this. But in the bone world, to be able to use this method was indeed shocking. This was why Chen Changsheng was afraid of the 9 caves below the Bone Halberd tribe. He knew that if he fell into any of the 9 caves, he would not be any better than the others. "What should we do now?" Chen Changsheng said. "Let's go to the 3rd cave." As the undead spoke, he walked down from the throne and took Chen Changsheng, Yu Xiaohui, and the others who were close to him to the 3rd cave. At this moment, Zhuowen was standing in front of the white statue. Since he destroyed the golden hand, he found that the golden hand did not appear again. The aura of the white statue also became weaker and weaker. In the end, it became an ordinary statue. Zhuowen touched the statue with his hand. He did not find any trace of the power of faith on the surface of the statue. It seemed that after he destroyed the golden hand, the power of faith in the white statue completely disappeared. It's useless. This is only one of the statues of faith in the undead's 9 caves. The power of faith absorbed by this statue is not stored in the other 9 statues. It is stored in the main statue. The main statue is hidden in a very secret place by the undead. A weak voice came from behind Zhuowen. Zhuowen turned around and found a middle-aged man among the more than 10 people who were knocked out by him. He was holding his head and struggling to get up. Noticing Zhuowen's gaze, the middle-aged man smiled and clasped his fist at Zhuowen. "Thank you for saving my life, benefactor. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid I would have died in this cave." Zhuowen nodded and said in a low voice, "How do you know this?" Although the middle-aged man in front of him looked disheveled, Zhuowen could tell from his temperament that this man was not ordinary. He should be a powerful expert in the outside world. However, After entering the bone world, one would lose their divine power. No matter how powerful one was in the outside world, once one entered the bone world, one would have to start from scratch. Everyone's starting point was the same. In the bone world, too many void sky experts were killed by true gods and heavenly gods. The middle-aged man smiled bitterly and said, "It's because the dozen of us here are the elders who participated in the construction of the 9 caves. Originally, we had an agreement with the undead. After we successfully obtained the power of faith, we would share it equally. However, he took it all for himself. Now, he's even making a move on us old fellows." Zhuowen waved his hand. He was not interested in the relationship between the middle-aged man and the undead. He said indifferently, "There are 9 caves. If I destroy all the white statues in the 9 caves, will I be able to destroy the undead?" The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "Not yet. However, it can weaken the undead's power. Because the 9 caves are constantly absorbing the power of faith in their own caves. Don't be fooled by the fact that the caves are full of corpses. There are only a few living people. The white statues capture the souls of these corpses when they were alive. These corpses contributed the power of faith to the undead when they were alive. After death, their souls can't be reincarnated. They stay in the statues and continue to contribute their faith." However, Zhuowen's pupils shrank. This dead spirit was really ruthless. These corpses had sacrificed their lives when they were alive, and their souls could not be reincarnated after death. They had contributed their faith to the dead spirit generation after generation. This was really too sinister. Zhuowen finally understood the middle-aged man's feelings. Death was not terrible. What was terrible was that they couldn't even be reincarnated after death. This was the real horror. Zhuowen waved his sleeve and summoned the devouring vortex. He took the unconscious people into his inner world. Then, he looked at the middle-aged man and said, "Take me to the other caves. Be quick." The middle-aged man nodded quickly. However, his body was too weak. He almost fell to the ground as soon as he stood up. Fortunately, Zhuowen supported him and fed him a pill. Ever since Zhuowen's spiritual space had been destroyed by the Golden Hand, the force that had imprisoned his spiritual sense had disappeared without a trace. Therefore, Zhuowen could now use his spiritual sense to take out the things in the spiritual ring. "Thank you, Senior." After the middle-aged man swallowed the pill, his body was in a much better state. He quickly cupped his fists. "No need to talk nonsense. Let's go," Zhuowen said indifferently. The middle-aged man hurriedly nodded. Then, the two of them quickly left the cave. Chapter 2199. 9 caves. According to the middle-aged man, this hidden passage was secretly left behind when they were building it. Now, it was finally put to use. Not long after Zhuowen and the middle-aged man left the cave, the undead led a group of people and rushed in excitedly. When the undead saw that the white statue at the end of the cave was dim, his face immediately became gloomy. With his eyes, how could he not see that the white statue had been completely destroyed? That golden hand was actually the condensation of the tens of thousands of souls stored inside the white statue. Zhuowen used soul kill to destroy the golden hand, but in reality, he had destroyed all the tens of thousands of souls in the white statue. Where are Han Yang and the others? Why are they all gone? Could it be that Han Yang and the others destroyed the white statue? Yu Xiaohui came not far from the statue and saw the pool of blood on the ground. She could not help but ask in surprise. The undead's eyes were gloomy, and he shook his head. Absolutely impossible. With the strength of Han Yang and the others, they could not resist the power of the white statue. "I'm afraid it's someone else." Just as the undead finished speaking, his expression changed greatly, and he said, "Not good, the statue in the first cave has also lost contact with me." "What? Just who did it? How could they have the ability to destroy the statue?" Yu Xiaohui was also somewhat surprised. "Xiaohui, go to the tribe and send 8 teams to the other 8 caves to wait for rabbits. Chang Sheng, follow me to the first cave." The undead ordered, then hurriedly left the cave with Chen Changsheng. Yu Xiaohui naturally did not dare to disobey the undead's orders. She cupped her hands and left the cave, heading to the tribe to organize the teams. In the first cave, the statue in front of Zhuowen was completely shattered. Immediately after, a golden light swept out from the statue, pouring into the palm-sized temple that Zhuowen had made in advance. This small temple was made of polished jade and was specially used to store souls. Zhuowen heard about this statue from the middle-aged man, and also knew that it stored the souls of all those innocent lives. The small temple represented peace, and these souls who were unable to reincarnate would eventually receive good karma after entering it. Furthermore, Zhuowen also discovered that as his soul entered the small temple, he discovered a strange power gradually surging into his body. That's the power of faith. You saved them, so these souls naturally showed gratitude and respect to you. This is also a kind of faith. It's much stronger than the faith of the undead who sacrificed themselves for you. True faith is actually sincere and not forced. The middle-aged man sighed softly. Han Yang, take me to the next cave. Although I'm not a saint, since I know that these souls are innocent, I have no reason to ignore them, Zhuowen said to the middle-aged man. Along the way, Zhuowen also learned that this middle-aged man's name was Han Yang. He was the Grand Elder of the Half-Moon Hall in the outside world. His position was second only to the ancestor of the Half-Moon Hall. He was a late-stage Void Sky 8th-step expert. The Void Sky 8th step could be subdivided into 4 small realms: early stage, middle stage, late stage, and peak stage. Old man Wu Qing was at the peak of the Void Sky 8th step, and Chen Chongsheng, who chased after Zhuowen, was at the late stage of the Void Sky 8th step. Fu Yuz and Yang Zhonghui were at the middle stage of the Void Sky 8th step. It was said that the ancestor of the Half-Moon Hall, Yuezu, was at the peak of the Void Sky 8th step, and was a peerless expert with half a foot in the Void Sky 9th step. It was precisely because of the existence of Yuezu that the Half-Moon Hall became the leader of the 10 great sects, and was ranked first among the 10 great sects. Their comprehensive strength and prestige were unparalleled. Zhuowen estimated his current strength, and estimated that he was at the early stage of the Void Sky 8th step. If Devour revealed his true body, he should be able to reach the middle stage of the Void Sky 8th step. Of course, Zhuowen collected these souls this time purely out of compassion. In any case, he planned to destroy the statues in the 9 caves, so he could easily rescue these souls. As for the power of faith, it was a pleasant surprise. Zhuowen and Han Yang moved quickly, and before Dead Spirit and the others, they had destroyed the statues in the 4 caves. When they arrived at the 5th cave, they immediately realized that something was wrong. The 5th cave was filled with shadows, and a group of guards was guarding it. Fortunately, Zhuowen could use his soul consciousness, so he had sensed something wrong. Thus, he and Han Yang had hidden. Brother Zhuo, what should we do now? There's a group of guards in the 5th cave. Should we force our way in? Han Yang asked Zhuowen in a low voice. Zhuowen nodded. There's no other way except to force our way in. Then, Zhuowen clenched his right hand, and instantly, more than 10 black thunderbolts shot out. These black thunderbolts were silent and fast. In just a blink of an eye, they had sunk into the back of the head of the guard in the 5th cave, killing him instantly. The black thunderbolts were the extreme lightning energy, and their power was terrifying. Moreover, these guards couldn't use their god power, so they were only a little stronger than ordinary people. Encountering these black thunderbolts, they would die without a doubt. After quietly killing this group of people, Zhuowen swiftly arrived in front of the statue. In front of this statue, there was a thin and withered figure kneeling. From this figure, Zhuowen knew that it was a woman, and this figure gave him a very familiar feeling. This woman was lying on the ground motionlessly, and the aura on her body was very weak. Zhuowen's soul consciousness swept out, and his face changed drastically. He quickly walked forward and pulled the woman back. Miss Lin. Zhuowen helped the woman up, and his face was slightly ugly. This woman was none other than Lin Shipping, who had joined the Bone Halberd tribe with Zhuowen. Originally, Zhuowen had set up a defensive array, a trap array, and a concealment array outside the cave. In his opinion, as long as Lin Shipping didn't go out, the people of the Bone Halberd tribe would have a hard time breaking in. But now, it seemed that he was wrong. Ever since he learned from the Devourer King that Sai Ling was a powerful god array master, Zhuowen knew that the array he set up outside the cave was useless. It was just that he had always thought that Sai Ling was the chief of the Bone Halberd tribe, so how could he shamelessly destroy other people's array? Now, he knew that Sai Ling was truly shameless. Zhuowen took Lin Shipping's pulse, and found that the latter's life force was not completely cut off. He let out a sigh of relief, then took out a drop of Heavenly Domain Star Essence and fed it to Lin Shipping. Heavenly Domain Star Essence. Han Yang looked at the white liquid that Zhuowen fed to Lin Shipping and immediately recognized that it was the Heavenly Domain Star Essence, and his heart was filled with shock. The Heavenly Domain Star Essence was extremely precious. Although the Half Moon Palace had such a treasure, it was limited, and they would never use it carelessly. But this Zhuowen in front of him directly took out a drop and fed it to an unfamiliar woman. In his eyes, this was an extremely wasteful act. Of course, the Heavenly Domain Star Essence was not his, so he couldn't say anything. He just felt pain in his heart. After taking the Heavenly Domain Star Essence, Lin Shipping slowly woke up and saw Zhuowen in front of her. Senior Zhuo. I'm not dreaming, am I? You. Why are you here? Chapter 2200. Facing the dead spirit. Miss Lin, this is not a good place to stay. You should go in first. Seeing that Lin Shipping was still in a daze, Zhuowen waved his sleeve and summoned the devouring vortex. He did not explain further. Lin Shipping nodded and entered the devouring vortex without hesitation. In Lin Shipping's opinion, a powerful being like Zhuowen would not harm her. After all, he could kill her as easily as squashing an ant. After putting away Lin Shipping, Zhuowen broke the white statue and collected the soul inside. The next few caves were all heavily guarded, but to Zhuowen, these guards were insignificant. After Zhuowen collected the souls in the 8th caste cave, he stepped into the 9th caste cave. Just as he stepped into the 9th caste cave, a scorching hot aura gushed out from within. Zhuowen reacted quickly and lifted Han Yang up by his collar. Then, with a stomp of his right foot, he left the place in an instant. The moment Zhuowen left, a huge fireball hit the place where Zhuowen was standing. The solid rock wall was burned into a huge pit by the scorching heat. Everything in the bone world was abnormally strong. When Zhuowen first entered the canyon at the entrance of the bone world, he used the 9 extinction sword to hack at the ground. He found that it was very difficult to leave a mark. The walls of this cave were extremely hard. Even a secondary heaven-breaking divine weapon would need to hack a few times to leave a mark. However, from this fireball, one could see how terrifyingly hot it was. If Zhuowen were to be hit by this fireball, he would definitely be severely injured, even if he wouldn't die immediately. After Zhuowen let go of Han Yang, he looked at the group of people not far away with a gloomy expression. Dead Spirit was holding a bone staff and looking at Zhuowen with fire in his eyes. Behind the Dead Spirit, Yu Xiaohui and the others, as well as the subordinates in bone clothes, followed. Among them, Zhuowen even saw a familiar face. Chen Changsheng, who was standing behind Undead, noticed Zhuowen's gaze and his expression immediately became uncomfortable. If he hadn't lost his divine power, he would have been able to easily dodge it. However, in his current state, facing that fireball, he would undoubtedly die. However, Zhuowen was able to dodge it easily, especially with the speed of his movement technique. It was definitely not something a cultivator who had lost his divine power could achieve. There's no trace of divine power flowing on this boy's body, but there's another kind of power. Is this the power of extreme Dao? Undead was a wily old fox. He could see the extreme Dao aura on Zhuowen's body at a glance. On the other hand, Yu Xiaohui looked at Zhuowen in surprise. At this moment, Zhuowen had already recovered his original appearance, so she naturally recognized Zhuowen. It was just that Yu Xiaohui did not expect this Zhuowen to be so powerful, to be able to dodge Lord Undead's attack. Zhuo Xiaoyu, congratulations. You actually came out of the corpse heavenly road so quickly. The Undead's eyes flickered, but he suddenly laughed out loud, as if he didn't know anything about the fireball sneak attacking Zhuowen just now. Zhuowen sneered in his heart, and said indifferently, "Chief is too kind. Hee. Looking at Zhuo Xiaoyu, you should have gained quite a bit from the corpse heavenly road, but little friend, you are not honest. We clearly had an agreement before. I will open the corpse heavenly road and let you in, and you need to help me get back the seven-headed bone flower. The undead suddenly said. However, Zhuowen said indifferently, Chief must be joking, the corpse heavenly road is too dangerous. I did enter the myriad head cave according to the agreement, but the seven-headed bone flower is too dangerous. I know that I can't take it down, so I gave up. So that's how it is. The undead nodded, as if he did not blame Zhuowen, but very quickly, his eyes narrowed, and a wave of killing intent surged out like a tide. I don't blame you for the matter of the corpse heavenly road. After all, life is more important than anything else. But why did you break into my cave and destroy my statue? Are you trying to cause trouble? The killing intent in the undead's eyes grew stronger and stronger, as if he couldn't wait to kill Zhuowen right now. Zhuowen slapped his forehead, as if blaming himself, and said, Chief, these caves are yours, I really didn't know. You should have told me earlier. If I had known that this cave was yours, even if you gave me 100 guts, I wouldn't have touched it. The undead trembled in anger. He knew that Zhuowen was deliberately angering him. The statues in the 9 caves were all in his image. As long as one wasn't a fool, they would know that these things belonged to him the moment they saw the statues. However, Zhuowen pretended to be angry, and the undead's killing intent became even stronger. Zhuowen, you are too bold. How dare you offend my master? In this corpse world, he is the king. You are courting death by provoking him. Chen Changsheng had already calmed down. He thought of the undead's various methods and knew that no matter how strong Zhuowen was, he couldn't be the undead's opponent. Therefore, he became fearless. Shut up, I am talking to your master. What right does a dog slave like you have to interrupt? Zhuowen said without any trace of politeness. You. Chen Chang was so angry that he was trembling as he glared at Zhuowen. After all, he was an old ancestor of Qiankuan sect. Now that Zhuowen had called him a dog slave, he felt extremely sullen in his heart. However, he did not dare to rush forward. In this place, Zhuowen's extreme power was not suppressed, and his strength was not suppressed by much. In this place, only the undead could firmly suppress Zhuowen. What about me? If you have the guts, then come out and fight me one-on-one. All you know is to bark like a dog. Don't you feel ashamed? Zhuowen said without any trace of politeness. Chen Changsheng had already turned hostile with him. Not to mention that Chen Changsheng's strength was suppressed in this corpse world. Even if Chen Changsheng's strength wasn't suppressed in the outside world, Zhuowen still didn't fear him. If it wasn't for the fact that my strength was suppressed, I would have killed you 1,000 times already. Chen Changsheng said unwillingly. At the end of the day, you don't dare to fight me one-on-one. Since that's the case, then don't embarrass yourself. Get lost. Zhuowen sneered. Chen Changsheng was really angry, but he didn't lose his mind. He calmed down and looked at Zhuowen with a gloomy gaze. The undead walked forward and looked at Zhuowen indifferently as if he was looking at a dead man. Zhuowen, it seems like you are very confident. Do you think that just because you have extreme strength, I am no match for you? The undead said calmly. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes and recalled Han Yang. He looked at the undead and said, Yes, and today I am here to kill you. The undead laughed and his killing intent grew stronger. He hammered the bone staff on the ground and instantly, the countless corpses in the cave exploded into bone fragments, forming a whirlwind behind the undead. Chapter 2201. Phagocytosis versus Death Spirit. All of you, step back. We'll talk after I kill this kid. Death Spirit said and leaped onto the bone python's head. Chen Changsheng, Yu Xiaohui, and the others retreated with reverence in their eyes. They didn't dare to underestimate this bone python. This bone python was condensed from the power of faith. Its destructive power was extremely terrifying. Even in the outside world, it was comparable to a cultivator of the void sky 8th step. Of course, the material in the bone world was much tougher than the outside world. A battle between void sky 8th step cultivators would definitely be earth-shattering in the outside world, but in the bone world, which was as tough as a prison, it was impossible to have the same power as the outside world. Roar. The bone python roared and swung its huge tail. It shot towards Zhuoan like an arrow leaving the bow. Its speed was so fast that Chen Changsheng and the others could only see a white shadow. Zhuoan coldly snorted and grabbed with both hands. Immediately, two divine swords made of lightning and fire energy condensed. Zhuoan stomped his right foot and met the attack fearlessly. His two swords danced, emitting a blazing light. Bang! 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 In just an instant, Zhuoan and the bone python collided. Zhuoan's two swords danced at an extremely fast speed, slashing out again and again. However, what shocked Zhuoan was that the bone python's head was extremely hard. The extreme Dao divine sword in his hand could only leave a slight mark on it. Whoosh! The instant whir when chopped down on the bone python's head, the bone python's huge tail was like a whip as it fiercely lashed out, creating a whistling sound in the air. Zhuoan threw out the extreme Dao divine sword with his right hand, causing the trajectory of the bone python's tail to deviate by quite a bit. It brushed past Zhuoan's body. Die! Death Spirit, who was standing on the bone python's head, growled. He pointed the bone staff in his hand and a green fireball shot towards Chen Changsheng at an extremely fast speed. Zhuoan, however, did not panic. He immediately summoned the phagocytosis that Devourer King had given him. The black imperial jade seal flew out of Zhuoan's hand, and when the terrifying green fireball hit the imperial jade seal, the fireball was immediately absorbed by the imperial jade seal. What? What is this? The undead stared at the phagocytosis summoned by Zhuoan in horror. He could sense a familiar and terrifying aura from the phagocytosis. Don't you recognize me? For so many years, you've used the sealed land to obtain many benefits from this king. Today, this king will calculate everything with you. King Shi's cold voice came from the phagocytosis. Then, the black phagocytosis grew bigger and bigger. In just a blink of an eye, it grew from the size of a palm to dozens of feet tall, occupying 2/3 of the cave. Chen Changsheng and the others were dumbfounded. They had no choice but to withdraw from the cave. They could sense the terrifying aura from the imperial jade seal. Death Spirit's eyes were gloomy. He turned to Zhuoan and said coldly, "You met that person on the path of corpses?" Zhuoan did not answer. Instead, it was King Shi inside the phagocytosis who laughed and said, "That's right. I led him here. You coward, other than using the seal to absorb my vitality, what else can you do?" Rumble. The black phagocytosis smashed down without any warning. It was like a small hill in front of Death Spirit. Death Spirit stomped his right foot and jumped down from the bone python's head. The bone python flew out, intending to block the phagocytosis. Unfortunately, the moment the bone python touched the phagocytosis, it let out a miserable cry. Its huge body collapsed inch by inch, turning into countless bone fragments. Fire shield. Undead suddenly raised his bone staff, and streams of faith power were transmitted into the bone staff. Soon after, the eyes of the skull at the top of the bone staff became glossy green, and it became extremely strange. Then, green flames gushed out from the eyes of the skull at the top of the bone staff. It was like a sea of fire, sweeping in front of Death Spirit and forming a solid wall of fire. "You'd better not force me. You can restrict divine power here, but you can't restrict the power of faith. I know you're afraid of this power. If you retreat now, we won't interfere in each other's business," Death Spirit said, his forehead covered in cold sweat. "Just with trash like you?" King Shi's disdainful laughter came from the phagocytosis. The phagocytosis's power increased by a lot. Catcher. As the phagocytosis's power increased, the fire shield in front of Death Spirit was unable to withstand it. Countless cracks appeared on its surface, as if it would shatter at any moment. After 5 breaths, the fire shield was broken. Zhuoan, who had retreated from the battle, heard Death Spirit's ferocious scream. "You forced me. Do you think I don't have a backup plan? Today, I'll show you my backup plan." Boom. As soon as Death Spirit finished talking, the entire cast cave shook hard. Countless rocks fell from the ceiling, hitting the ground like raindrops. When the dust settled, Zhuoan found that there was a big hole above the cast cave. Death Spirit and phagocytosis weren't in the cave. Apparently, they had left through that big hole. Zhuoan immediately dashed to the end of the cast cave where the statues were. His eyes sparkled as he destroyed the last statue. He took out the small temple and collected all the souls inside. After that, Zhuoan returned to the center of the cast cave. He jumped up and jumped out of the hole in the sky. At this moment, the entire Bone Halberd tribe was in chaos. The battle between Death Spirit and phagocytosis was getting more and more terrifying. The entire Bone Halberd tribe was filled with energy fluctuations. Most of the caves were destroyed, and the people inside were dead or injured. Zhuoan dashed out of the cast cave. He immediately stopped and stared at the sky. He saw that in the sky above the Bone Halberd tribe, a huge formation had appeared out of nowhere. Countless ripples appeared on the surface of the formation, which looked ferocious and terrifying. At the same time, terrifying attacks were launched from every corner of the formation. The target was the phagocytosis, who was fighting with Death Spirit. Originally, phagocytosis's power was enough to suppress Death Spirit. However, at this moment, Death Spirit was using the formation of the Bone Halberd tribe to fight against phagocytosis. Phagocytosis didn't have much of an advantage. Zhuoan also noticed that phagocytosis seemed to be afraid of Death Spirit's faith power. Although it seemed to be fighting with Death Spirit fiercely, Zhuoan could see that phagocytosis seemed to be avoiding Death Spirit on purpose. "Junior, lend me a hand." Suddenly, Devourer King's voice echoed in Zhuoan's mind. Zhuoan's eyes flickered, but he didn't rush forward immediately. Instead, he transmitted his voice, "Senior, wait a moment. I need to refine the death energy you gave me. Otherwise, I can't take down Death Spirit." After that, Zhuoan randomly chose a cave. At the same time, he took out 9 beast bone array discs and set up a level 7 defensive formation. With the power of the level 7 defensive formation, it was enough to resist the shockwaves from the battle between phagocytosis and Death Spirit. Zhuoan found an excuse because he really wasn't Death Spirit's opponent. After all, if Death Spirit didn't use the 9-cycle samsara formation, Zhuoan could only fight with him. Now that he had the 9-cycle samsara formation, Zhuoan definitely wasn't his opponent. Chapter 2202. Refining the Death Aura That Little Bastard. The Devourer King's exasperated voice came from the phagocytosis. He knew that Zhuoan didn't trust him at all. Sai Ling sighed in his heart. It was already difficult for him to deal with the phagocytosis. If Zhuoan joined the battle, he might really be defeated. However, Sai Ling was still on guard. He was afraid that Zhuoan and the Devourer King were just acting to confuse him. If Zhuoan suddenly attacked, it would be too late for him to cry. Inside the cave, Zhuoan's eyes flickered. He summoned the Thunder Fire Sword and ordered, "Xiao Hei, pay attention to the battle outside. If there's any movement, tell me immediately." Xiao Hei sat on the sword's hilt. She knew the importance of the situation. She nodded and flew to the entrance of the cave, silently watching the battle outside. Zhuoan took out a black cube. He opened his mouth and spat out the extreme fire, which wrapped around the black cube. He was ready to refine the death aura inside the black cube. With Zhuoan's experience, he could see that the death aura and the phagocytosis weren't that different in strength. It would be difficult to determine the winner in a short time. Thus, he still had a lot of time to refine the death aura. Time passed slowly. The battle in the Bone Halberd tribe was getting fiercer and fiercer. The commotion was getting bigger and bigger. The entire bone world was affected. Many creatures in the bone world were alarmed by the terrifying commotion. Most of the cultivators squatted in the tribe, trembling and praying. There were also some brave ones who followed the commotion to the Bone Halberd tribe. However, no one dared to approach the tribe. 3 days later, the Bone Halberd tribe was completely in ruins. More than 80% of the tribesmen were killed. The rest of the tribesmen escaped quickly and avoided the disaster. Of course, in the Bone Halberd tribe, the only place that wasn't in ruins was Zhuoan's cave. Zhuoan had set up a level 7 defensive array outside the cave, and the location was at the edge of the Bone Halberd tribe. Therefore, although the battle between the undead and the phagocytosis was terrifying, it wasn't to the extent that it would affect Zhuowen. Mother **K, there's actually such a terrifying guy in the bone world. I'm afraid that Wu Ling's strength is about the same as Wu Qing's, or maybe even stronger. Outside the cave, Xiao Hei gazed numbly at the ripples that appeared on the surface of the Grand Formation, and she couldn't help but click her tongue in wonder as she looked at the spectre and phagocytosis that were still fighting above. I have the 9-cycle reincarnation formation. You can't take me down. I think you know better than I do. You'd better back off. With a wave of the necromancer's bone staff, the green flames transformed into a huge dragon, blasting the oncoming phagocytosis back. Old fart, remove this 9-cycle reincarnation formation for me, and I'll back off. Otherwise, I won't rest until you're dead. Also, don't forget about that Zhuowen. As long as he comes out of seclusion, your time of death will come. The phagocytosis floated in the air, and his voice was filled with gloom. The undead sneered and said, that Zhuowen isn't as good as you think. I'm afraid that he's planning for both sides to suffer. I don't think you're a fool. It's best for you to see the facts clearly. The phagocytosis turned a deaf ear to the undead's words, but his heart was filled with anger. Obviously, he was also somewhat suspicious of Zhuowen's goal. Old fart, this king will not rest until you're dead. Die for me. The devouring king knew that he had no other choice. If he let the undead go this time, the undead would become stronger and stronger in the future. Moreover, the undead would become more vigilant and wouldn't give him a chance to escape. Therefore, he had to kill the undead this time, even if he had to pay a huge price. Rumble. The phagocytosis was wrapped in a terrifying devouring power. Like a dark cloud pressing down on a mountain, it suddenly blasted towards the undead. The undead's face was ugly, but his heart was filled with helplessness. He naturally knew what the devouring king was thinking. This time, the devouring king had relied on Zhuowen to come out. How could he retreat so easily? Inside the cave, Zhuowen waved his sleeve, and the extreme fire energy was absorbed into his sleeve. However, his brows slowly creased as he looked at the undamaged death chi in his hand. For 3 days and 3 nights, Zhuowen had used the extreme fire energy, but he couldn't refine the death chi completely. Why is this death chi so difficult to refine? Could it be that there's something wrong with the refining method? Zhuowen slightly creased his brows as he silently looked at the undamaged black cube in his hand. Hey! Zhuowen's expression suddenly changed, and he immediately took out the small temple that housed the souls from his spirit ring. At this moment, the power of faith in the small temple was extremely dense. When Zhuowen's consciousness entered the small temple, he could clearly see countless souls kneeling on the ground and praying devoutly. What a powerful power of faith! I never thought that this small temple would actually gather so much power of faith in such a short period of time. This speed is much faster than the undead's method. Zhuowen murmured. He couldn't help but recall Han Yang's words. The power of faith was bidirectional. If the power of faith was forcefully obtained, not only would it not be pure, but the speed would also be very slow. However, Zhuowen had saved the souls that had been tortured by the undead and obtained their sincere devotion. Not only was the power of faith of the highest quality, but the speed of accumulation was also much faster than the undead's. Although the current power of faith was insignificant compared to the undead's power of faith, Zhuowen knew that it wouldn't take too long for him to reach the same level as the undead if he continued to accumulate it at this speed. Of course, Zhuowen didn't know how to use the power of faith. However, energy was ultimately different from divine power. The way to use the power of faith shouldn't be too different. The undead said that the Devourer King seemed to be afraid of the power of faith. I wonder if the power of faith would be of any help in refining the death chi? Zhuowen murmured to himself. His eyes grew brighter and brighter. Soon after, he held the small temple in his hand. With a thought, a dense milky white energy gushed out of the small temple. This milky white energy was the power of faith. When the power of faith completely enveloped the black cube, Zhuowen was pleasantly surprised to find that the deathly chi in the black cube finally moved. It kept rolling as if it was facing a great enemy. Zhuowen knew that the power of faith would be of great use in refining the death chi. Hence, he immediately increased the output of the power of faith. Sizzle. 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 Zhuowen discovered that the deathly qi in the black cube began to struggle. It broke free from the black cube as if it wanted to escape. However, how could Zhuowen allow the deathly qi to escape? He immediately controlled the power of faith to intercept the deathly qi. At the same time, Zhuowen used the power of faith to create white flames that constantly roasted the deathly qi. The deathly qi had no way out. It could only resist the white flames created by the power of faith. Chapter 2203. 9 Reincarnations. Zhuowen spent a day and a night to finally refine 1/10 of the deathly aura into an incomparably pitch-black fine needle. The death qi was very powerful, and Zhuowen didn't have much of it in his body. Therefore, in order to conserve the death qi, he naturally refined smaller objects like the needle. Although the power of faith could restrain the death qi was extraordinary. It would take some time to completely refine the death qi. Refining 1/10 of it was already very fast. Kid, those 2 fellows are fighting their way to your place. Zhuowen had just refined 1/10 of the death qi and was about to continue refining it when Xiao He rushed over from the cave entrance. He couldn't help but shout. Zhuowen narrowed his eyes. He took a step forward with his right foot and arrived at the cave entrance. At the same time, terrifying vibrations could be clearly heard coming from his surroundings. Zhuowen raised his head to look at the sky and immediately saw undead and the phagocytosis fighting unceasingly. They were slowly moving towards him, and before long, they were above the cave he was in. Boom! 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 The aftermath of the battle was extremely terrifying. When it hit the array, dense ripples appeared. Zhuowen's expression changed slightly. He knew that the Devourer King and undead were doing this on purpose. The Devourer King originally wanted Zhuowen to help him, but now, Zhuowen had hidden himself to refine the death qi. Obviously, the Devourer King wanted to use this method to express his dissatisfaction. As for Undead's goal, it was obvious that he wanted Zhuowen to die. It would be best if he died from the aftermath of their battle. Zhuowen's mouth was full of coldness. Neither of those 2 old fellows were good people, but he, Zhuowen, wasn't someone who could be bullied easily. Catcher. Finally, a clear cracking sound rang out. The level 7 formation that Zhuowen was in immediately shattered. Zhuowen kicked off with his right foot and immediately left the cave that had been reduced to ruins in the next moment. Junior, you should be almost done refining the death qi, right? Are you going to help me now? Zhuowen could hear the killing intent in his voice. Haha, that's only natural. It's all thanks to Senior for helping me block this old fart for so long. Thus, Junior was able to refine a portion of the death qi, just enough to deal with this old fart. Zhuowen sent a sound transmission, and with a stomp of his right foot, he rushed towards the battlefield of the undead and the phagocytosis. The moment he rushed out, Zhuowen swung his hands, and immediately threw out 2 extreme Dao divine swords towards the undead. The undead's eyes were gloomy. He raised his bone staff, and countless bones gathered in front of him, forming an airtight bone shield, blocking the 2 extreme Dao divine swords. Bang! However, when the undead was blocking the extreme Dao divine sword, the phagocytosis drilled through the air. The phagocytosis suddenly shrank and turned into a black speck of light. It shot out and headed straight for the dead spirit's heart. Poochie. The black speck of light was too fast. The undead spirit didn't even have time to react before the speck of light came out from his back, bringing with it a strand of black blood. The undead suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood. Just as he was about to turn around, Zhuowen had already appeared in front of the undead spirit. An extreme Dao divine sword condensed in his hand once again, and he unceremoniously slashed towards the undead spirit's neck. Poochie. The extreme Dao divine sword smoothly sliced through the undead spirit's neck, bringing with it a stream of blood and a head that soared into the sky. On the other hand, Zhuowen passed by the undead spirit's corpse, and steadily landed not far away. Zhuowen was a little surprised. He never thought that he would be able to get rid of the undead spirit so easily. Originally, he thought that he would need to use the needles formed from the death qi, but now it seemed that there was no need at all. Kid, be careful. This old fart won't die so easily. The voice of the devouring king quietly sounded in Zhuowen's mind, and soon after, an ominous premonition arose in Zhuowen's heart. Boom! A terrifying green flaming character surged out from beneath Zhuowen's feet, enveloping Zhuowen's entire body within, instantly submerging his figure. Phagocytosis, on the other hand, hurriedly retreated as he stared at the undead spirit, who was standing up again, with fear in his eyes. I really didn't expect that this 9 reincarnation formation would actually have a function that I don't know about. Phagocytosis stared at the undead spirit in front of him with a fearful expression and said coldly. The undead spirit turned its head and looked indifferently at Zhuowen, who was submerged in the green flames. Then, it looked at phagocytosis and said, "You only know that the 9 reincarnation formation absorbs your life force to extend my life and use illusions. You don't know the true use of the 9 reincarnation formation. In this formation, there are 9 reincarnations for those who set up the formation. In other words, in this 9 reincarnation formation, I have 9 chances to be reincarnated. Within these 9 chances, I can kill you several times. Originally, I didn't want to expose the function of this 9 reincarnation formation. Unfortunately, you forced me into this state. Zhuowen deserved to die, and you don't have to leave. Today, I will leave you, phagocytosis, behind and erase the divine sense you left here." As he spoke, the undead spirit laughed sinisterly. His sleeves and beard fluttered without wind as he stomped his bone staff on the ground. Instantly, countless bone fragments surrounded his body, forming a sturdy bone coat. Bang! 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 The moment the bone coat formed, huge bone spikes suddenly shot out from the ground within the Bone Halberd tribe's territory. The bone spikes shot into the sky, each one no less than a towering tree. The phagocytosis snorted coldly, but he kept dodging the bone spikes that shot out from the ground. He was in a difficult situation. While the phagocytosis was dodging the bone spikes, the undead spirit moved again. He didn't know when he had appeared above the undead spirit. The bone staff in his hand smashed mercilessly on the phagocytosis, smashing the phagocytosis to the ground. However, the phagocytosis wasn't simple. He roared and spewed out a terrifying black fog. "This king has miscalculated. I didn't expect you to have such a trick up your sleeve. But don't be complacent. Do you think this king doesn't have a backup plan? If that's the case, then you are gravely mistaken." The black fog grew bigger and bigger, covering the entire Bone Halberd tribe. If it weren't for the 9 reincarnation formation blocking the Bone Halberd tribe's territory, the black fog would have spread even wider. The undead spirit frowned and couldn't help but retreat to the edge of the Bone Halberd tribe. He raised his bone staff and green flames spread out in a radius of dozens of jong to prevent the black fog from invading. Boom! All of a sudden, a gigantic black claw emerged from the black mist in front of him. The surface of this black claw was covered with distinct layers of scales, looking exceptionally ferocious and terrifying. Rumble! The black claw slammed into the green flames in front of the undead spirit and extinguished the green flames in an instant. Then, the undead spirit was caught in the claw. Just as the undead spirit was about to speak, the claw squeezed and the undead spirit was crushed into pieces. "Since you have 9 lives, this king will kill you 9 times. The Devourer King's furious voice came from the black fog. This was the final trump card he had left on the phagocytosis. It was used to increase the power of the seal on the phagocytosis. In other words, the Devourer King had spent countless years refining 8,999 seals. In this short period of time, he might reseal all of them to obtain more power. After this use, the phagocytosis seals would be restored to 9,999 seals. The Devourer King would have to spend countless years to refine the seals on the phagocytosis. Moreover, it would take an extremely long time to refine the seals to such a degree. Moreover, this secret technique would cause great damage to the divine consciousness that the Devourer King had left on the phagocytosis. Chapter 2204. Undead Fall. Bang! 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 The power Devourer King gained from sacrificing the layers of restrictions on the phagocytosis was too great. The terrifying Black Claw continued to attack Undead Fall, killing him again and again. When Undead Fall was killed for the 8th time and was about to be resurrected, the Black Claw slammed down again. Undead Fall screamed. As soon as he was resurrected, he immediately took out the bone staff. The bone staff suddenly exploded, and boundless green flames rushed out from it, instantly turning into a huge sea of fire. The sea of fire was too terrifying. The high temperature released caused the surrounding space to distort. When the Black Claw slammed into the sea of fire, its irresistible momentum came to a halt. Due to the terrifying temperature of the sea of fire, the surface of the Black Claw showed signs of being burnt. The ink-black scales curled up, looking extremely miserable. If one were to look carefully, the Black Claw was gradually dimming. It was obvious that the Black Claw was reaching its limit. Undead Fall also noticed this. His eyes flickered as he hastily retreated dozens of steps, trying to get as far away from the Black Claw as possible. Inside the phagocytosis, Devourer King let out an unwilling roar. He was only one step away from annihilating Undead Fall. Was he going to fail at the last step? Devourer King was very clear about his own situation. The restrictions on the phagocytosis were about to be completely sealed, and the powerful Black Claw was about to collapse. Devourer King originally planned to kill Undead Fall 9 times. However, Undead Fall suddenly sacrificed the bone staff in exchange for great power, blocking the final attack of the phagocytosis. Devourer King knew that Undead Fall's consciousness was about to collapse when the restrictions on the phagocytosis were completely sealed. However, he helplessly discovered that the Black Claw couldn't escape from the sea of fire. "Hehe, you didn't manage to kill me in the end. You won't have the chance to come out in the future." Undead Fall sighed in relief when he saw the Black Claw trapped in the sea of fire. At the same time, he felt pain in his heart. Inside the bone staff was the source of the power of the undead. It contained most of the power of faith that the undead had collected in the skeleton world for so many years. Now, in order to block the Black Claw, he released all the faith power in the bone staff. The faith power in his body could be said to be very little, and his strength was reduced by more than half. However, being able to block the killing intent of the Devourer King, Undead felt that it was all worth it. At the same time, after this incident, he made up his mind to never open the corpse heavenly road again. After all, if another person like Zhuoan were to enter the Devouring King and bring out even more powerful treasures for him, he would really be done for. Poochie. Just when Death Spirit fell into deep thought, a trace of a bad premonition arose in his heart, and then he suddenly turned around and retreated swiftly. The undead spirit's reaction could not be said to be slow, but he was still a step too slow. A divine sword that was entwined with lightning and fire energy quietly flew out, and then the undead spirit's right arm, which was covered in blood, was suddenly thrown out. Clutching his severed arm, the undead looked at the young man who had appeared behind him in horror, and couldn't help but ask, "You're not dead?" The young man who appeared in front of the undead was none other than Zhuoan. When the undead resurrected for the first time, he immediately used the green flames to attack Zhuoan, submerging Zhuoan in flames. In the undead's view, Zhuoan didn't show any signs of struggling or coming out, so he thought that this kid was dead for sure, so he didn't pay much attention to him. Zhuoan was indeed attacked by the green flames, but no matter how strong the green flames were, they couldn't be stronger than the extreme flame. At that time, the moment Zhuoan was wrapped in the green flames, he summoned the extreme flame to protect himself, but he wasn't in a hurry to get out. Instead, he silently waited for an opportunity. Obviously, the eruption of the phagocytosis had created an opportunity for Zhuoan. Originally, with the phagocytosis being so powerful, Zhuoan thought that he didn't need to take action, so he had been hiding. When the undead used the bone staff to block the Black Claw, Zhuoan knew that his chance had come. That was why the current scene was happening. "Junior, well done. Most of the undead's strength is in the bone staff. Now that the bone staff has been destroyed, he has less than 1/10 of his strength left. Kill him." Phagocytosis, who was trapped in the green flames, naturally saw this scene, and the Devourer King's divine sense that had been left on it immediately said in ecstasy, Dead Spirit's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He hurriedly said, "Zhuo Wen, listen to me. I don't know why you want to help the king of this sealed land, but if you kill me, I think you will definitely regret it. As long as you kill me, the 9-cycle samsara formation will be completely destroyed. The seal of this sealed land is already severely damaged due to the passage of time. As long as the 9-cycle samsara formation is destroyed, the king might be able to break out of the seal. At that time, do you think the king will really give you benefits and not kill you?" The Devourer King's exasperated voice came from the phagocytosis. "Undead, you're bullshitting. This little guy isn't a human, he's from the same race as me. I'm not as sinister and cunning as you humans. After making a promise, you turn your back on me." Undead was startled. He looked at Zhuowen strangely. Just as Zhuowen was about to make his move, Undead suddenly transmitted a message to Zhuowen: "If you're from the same race as this king, you'll be in even more danger. If you kill me, you'll be finished as well. If you don't believe me, you can kill me." Zhuowen, who was surging with killing intent, slowly narrowed his eyes. He was a little hesitant about whether this undead was just stalling for time. "Junior, if you kill this undead, you'll have made a great contribution. As long as this king can do it, I will definitely do it for you. As long as you kill this old fart." The Devourer King's anxious voice immediately came from the phagocytosis. It seemed like he couldn't wait for Zhuowen to kill Undead immediately. Zhuowen looked at Undead, then at the phagocytosis trapped in the green flames not far away. With a stomp of his right foot, he rushed towards Undead. Undead's pupils shrunk. He hurriedly transmitted a message: "Kid, are you crazy? Don't you want to know why you're in danger?" "Not interested." As soon as Zhuowen said this, the divine sword in his hand suddenly shot out, piercing through Death Spirit's body. At the same time, Zhuowen's right hand secretly touched Death Spirit's forehead, secretly extracting Death Spirit's soul and storing it in the small temple in his spirit ring. Chapter 2205. Array Diagram. Good job, Junior. You've done well. Now, come over here and help me leave this green sea of fire. This sea of fire is too terrifying. "I can't leave for a while," said the Devouring King. Zhuowen sneered in his heart. This green sea of fire was a powerful attack created by the undead spirit's accumulated faith power. Even the terrifying Black Claw was trapped inside. Was he, Zhuowen, courting death by going in? "What? You're not willing? Don't worry. As long as you enter, use your devouring power to enter the phagocytosis. This king will have the ability to break out of this green sea of fire," said the Devouring King unhappily. Zhuowen shook his head and said, "Senior, this sea of fire is too terrifying. This junior doesn't dare to take the risk." The Devouring King fell silent and sighed. "It's been hard on you. Since that's the case, you can wait outside and see if this king can rely on himself to break out of this sea of fire." After saying that, the Devouring King didn't say anything else. Instead, he controlled the Black Claw to resist the surrounding sea of fire, as if he was trying to find a way out. Zhuowen watched silently for a while. With his eyesight, he knew that the sea of fire would dissipate after a period of time. However, whether the Devouring King's divine sense could last until then was unknown. This sea of fire was too terrifying. Zhuowen didn't have any close relationship with the Devouring King. At most, they were partners. He wouldn't risk his life for this. Zhuowen no longer paid attention to the struggling phagocytosis. Instead, he looked at the undead spirit's cave with a burning gaze. Zhuowen had never seen this 9 revolving samsara array in the outside world. Clearly, it was created by the undead spirit in the bone world. Especially the powerful effect of the 9 revolving samsara array. Zhuowen was really envious of it. If he could set up this 9 revolving samsara array in his own force in the future, then he would be like the undead spirit in this 9 revolving samsara array. He would have 9 chances to reincarnate. It could be said that he couldn't be killed. He knew that the undead spirit would definitely keep such a precious array. He had to find the original copy of this 9 revolving samsara array. Thinking of this, Zhuowen rushed into the cave where the undead lived. Because the battle between the undead and the phagocytosis was too fierce, the entire bone halberd tribe had turned into ruins, and the cave where the undead lived was no exception. Zhuowen released his consciousness and continued to search. He knew that for something as precious as the original draft of the 9 Revolutions Samsara formation, the undead must have hidden it very deeply. It would not be destroyed so easily. After searching through the ruins for nearly 2 hours, Zhuowen suddenly exclaimed in surprise and stopped in front of the shattered throne. Zhuowen was no stranger to this throne. It was the throne that the undead sat on. The reason why Zhuowen paid attention to the throne was mainly because the throne had only cracked and not turned into dust. Logically speaking, no matter how sturdy the throne was, it should have been shattered into powder by the terrifying shockwaves from the battle between the undead and the phagocytosis. But now, the throne had only cracked, and it hadn't shattered into powder at all. Zhuowen carefully observed the throne and found that there were traces of restrictions around the throne. A mere throne actually had restrictions placed around it. From this, it could be seen that there must be something unusual hidden inside. Thinking of this, Zhuowen took out the throne and carefully scanned the throne with his divine sense. Finally, he found an empty space in between the cushions below the throne. Smashing the cushion, Zhuowen found a jade-colored brocade box hidden inside. Opening the brocade box, a sheepskin blueprint was quietly placed inside. Opening it, Zhuowen's eyes suddenly lit up. Because this blueprint recorded the principle of the 9 revolving samsara formation. It was said that this 9 revolving samsara formation was not particularly complete. It was only a peak tier 8 array. It was said that if this 9 revolving samsara formation was completely perfected, it would not be a peak tier 8 array, but a tier 9 array. At the back of the blueprint, there was a paragraph written by the undead. The general meaning was that he was unable to perfect this 9 revolving samsara formation because this 9 revolving samsara formation was not created by the undead himself. It was said that the 9 revolving samsara formation was obtained by the undead in a secret realm in the starry sky. The blueprint he obtained at that time recorded that the 9 revolving samsara formation was badly damaged. Fortunately, the undead's level of array Dao was very high, and he was also very patient. After tens of thousands of years of research, he finally perfected the 9 revolving samsara formation by more than 90%. But even with his level, he was unable to perfect the remaining 10%. But even if the 9 revolving samsara formation was not perfect, its power was still terrifying. This could be seen from the way the undead used the 9 revolving samsara formation to fight the phagocytosis. Solemnly putting away the blueprint, Zhuowen was extremely excited. He knew that the 9 revolving samsara formation would be of great help to the Riker. It was absolutely beyond imagination. Zhuowen stood in the ruins of the Bone Halberd tribe. Looking around, he discovered that the Bone Halberd tribe was already empty. That old bastard Chen Changsheng escaped rather quickly, but no matter how fast he was, it was useless. I had my eyes on that old man long ago. Zhuowen's gaze fell on the mountain range in the north. The corners of his mouth curled up, and he disappeared into the ruins of the Bone Halberd tribe. Previously, when he was fighting the undead, he had deliberately paid attention to Chen Changsheng's whereabouts. Now, he naturally knew the direction Chen Changsheng had fled in. On the road between the mountain ranges in the north, a group of people were fleeing. These were the people who had escaped from the Bone Halberd tribe. The 2 people at the front were a man and a woman. Moreover, this man and woman were not unfamiliar to Zhuowen. They were Chen Changsheng and Yu Xiaohui. I just heard the chief scream. Lord Chen, do you think the chief will be all right? Yu Xiaohui was out of her wits. She couldn't help but look at Chen Changsheng. She knew that Chen Changsheng had always been highly regarded by the undead, so she couldn't help but ask at this moment. Chen Changsheng's gaze was gloomy. He had a bad premonition in his heart. He had clearly heard the undead's screams from before. He knew that even if the undead hadn't died, he would most likely be in danger. Right now, we can't interfere at all. We must retreat first. As the saying goes, where there is life, there is hope. As long as we don't die, we will definitely avenge Master in the future. Chen Changsheng's words were impassioned, but he had already made up his mind. He would leave the Bone Halberd tribe and never return. He was very clear that as long as Zhuowen didn't die, if he was found, he would definitely die. The undead was most likely in danger. He didn't dare to face Zhuowen at all. Lord Chen is right. Where there is life, there is hope. In the future, we will definitely kill our way back. Yu Xiaohui also nodded. The others naturally followed the two's lead. They didn't have any objections at all. Haha, what a good saying. Where there is life, there is hope. These words are correct, but are you sure you can leave today? Suddenly, an untimely voice slowly came from the front. Chen Changsheng and the others immediately trembled. Their entire bodies stiffened as they looked forward. At the end of the road, a black-clothed youth with a long sword on his back was slowly walking over. Wasn't this the black-clothed Zhuowen? You! Zhuowen, how did you find this place? Chen Changsheng was greatly shocked. He looked at Zhuowen who was slowly walking over, the corners of his mouth constantly trembling. Zhuowen, however, sneered and said, "Do I need to find you? What do you want? Do you want to kill us?" Yu Xiaohui suddenly spoke. Zhuowen, however, shook his head. He pointed at Chen Changsheng and said, "I can let you live, but the premise is that Chen Changsheng kneels down, crawls to me, and then swears to become Zhuowen's servant." Chapter 2206. Servant, you want me to kneel down? Chen Changsheng's face paled and his voice became increasingly low. Not only do you have to kneel down, you have to crawl over and apologize to me. Zhuowen indifferently added. Master Chen, you have to agree to Zhuowen's request. Otherwise, we will all die. Yu Xiaohui suddenly spoke. Chen Changsheng turned his head and looked at Yu Xiaohui in disbelief. All along, Yu Xiaohui had treated him with reverence and respect. Now, with a single sentence from Zhuowen, Yu Xiaohui immediately revealed her true colors. That's right, for us, you should kneel down and beg Zhuowen for mercy. Master Zhuowen didn't say that he wants you to die. He only wants you to apologize and become his servant. What are you hesitating for? The rest of the people also began to clamor. In a moment, Chen Changsheng was pushed to the ground by the crowd. His face was incomparably pale. He wanted to resist, but found that he didn't have the slightest bit of Shen Qi in his body. In the past, these people were only ants in his eyes. Now, it was difficult for two fists to fight against four hands. Zhuowen silently looked at all of this. The killing intent in his eyes became increasingly dense. He made up his mind that if Chen Changsheng chose to resist because of his dignity, he, Zhuowen, would not show any mercy. This Chen Changsheng had repeatedly tried to kill him to silence him. Zhuowen wouldn't have any pity for him. Just as Zhuowen was about to act, Chen Changsheng suddenly knelt on the ground. Then, he lowered his head and crawled towards Zhuowen. Finally, he crawled towards Zhuowen's feet and said in a low voice, Chen Changsheng had eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. Please forgive me, master. Zhuowen's gaze froze. He didn't expect Chen Changsheng to so straightforwardly beg for mercy. This was out of his expectations. If he were to think about it from Chen Changsheng's perspective, Zhuowen wouldn't be so surprised. How could a cultivator who could cultivate to Chen Changsheng's level be easy to deal with? They definitely placed cultivation as their #1 priority. They pursued the highest level. Having cultivated for countless years, Chen Changsheng valued his life more than anyone else. He definitely didn't want to die like this. So what if he became Zhuowen's servant? It was fine as long as he didn't die. After all, if he died, there would be nothing left. If he lived, there was still hope. Even if he had to become Zhuowen's servant, Chen Changsheng didn't want to die a useless death. Master, do you have any other requests? While Zhuowen was still in a daze, Chen Changsheng lowered his head and cautiously said. Zhuowen waved his hand and formed a seal with his right hand. He pointed at Chen Changsheng's forehead and planted a slave seal in his sea of consciousness. He said calmly, "Get up. Since you're my servant now, you can follow me from now on." Although Zhuowen's goal was to kill Chen Changsheng, It was a pity that Chen Changsheng was too sensible. Yes, master. Chen Changsheng hurriedly got up and respectfully stood behind Zhuowen. His attitude was indescribable. Yu Xiaohui and the others saw that Chen Changsheng was so sensible and inwardly sighed. They immediately retreated to the side and lowered their heads submissively, not daring to look at Zhuowen. Sai Ling is finished. There will be no bone halberd tribe in the future. Scram. Zhuowen said coldly. Yu Xiaohui and the others inwardly sighed. They all cupped their hands towards Zhuowen and quickly left. Although they were shocked by the news of Sai Ling's death, compared to their own lives, this wasn't important. After Yu Xiaohui and the others left, Zhuowen turned to look at Chen Changsheng. The latter lowered his head submissively, not daring to show any strange expression. Changsheng, I heard you call Sai Ling your master. Could it be that Sai Ling was once a member of the Heaven and Earth sect? Zhuowen asked casually. Chen Changsheng hurriedly said, Master is right. Sai Ling's original name was Chen Xuanji. He was the ancestor of the previous generation of the Heaven and Earth sect and also my master. However, because his life was about to end, he stubbornly left the Heaven and Earth sect in order to find a treasure to extend his life. However, he never returned. After I landed here, I found out that he had actually entered a fault in the starry sky and relied on the sealed land to extend his life. Zhuowen nodded. Chen Changsheng's words were more or less what he had guessed, so he wasn't too surprised. Zhuowen then asked about Sai Ling, and Chen Changsheng answered them one by one. Moreover, Zhuowen also mentioned the 9-cycle samsara formation. However, Chen Changsheng's face was blank. Clearly, he didn't know much about the 9-cycle samsara formation. Changsheng, what's your cultivation level now? Zhuowen stared at Chen Changsheng and asked. Although he had guessed that Chen Changsheng was at the late stage of Void Heaven 8 steps, he wasn't too sure, so he asked. Chen Changsheng hurriedly said, Master, this lowly one is at the late stage of Void Heaven 8 steps. However, compared to Master, this lowly one is really insignificant. Zhuowen didn't really care about Chen Changsheng's flattery. Instead, he asked indifferently, Do you know the specific division of Void Heaven 9 steps? I think that since Void Heaven 8 steps is divided into 4 small realms, then Void Heaven 9 steps must have a corresponding division of realms. Chen Changsheng's eyes flashed and he nodded. This lowly one only knows a little about this. Because Void Heaven 9 steps already touches the laws of the heavenly Tao, cultivators of Void Heaven 9 steps are much stronger than those of Void Heaven 8 steps. Void Heaven 9 steps requires one to understand life and death. Back then, I heard my master say that this understanding of life and death requires a sequence. Master died after you, so in the end, it's life and death. Void Heaven 9 steps has 3 small realms, which are divided according to the understanding of life and death. They are respectively the realm of understanding life, the realm of understanding death, and the 2 extremes of life and death. Each small realm is divided into small success, large success, and perfection. Zhuowen nodded. As his cultivation continued to approach Void Heaven 9 steps, he could clearly feel that the specific division of Void Heaven 9 steps was different from the other Void Heaven worlds. Originally, he wanted to wait until he dealt with the grievances of the 10 great sects before asking Old Man Wu Qing, but he didn't expect him to fall into the starry sky fault. This Chen Changsheng was the ancestor of Heaven and Earth sect, so he definitely knew no less than Old Man Wu Qing. Now that Chen Changsheng had become his subordinate, he naturally had to make good use of him. Apart from Great Brahma, is there really no other expert of Void Heaven 9 steps in Great Brahma Heaven domain? Zhuowen asked again. Chen Changsheng frowned slightly and sighed softly. Great Brahma Heaven domain is ranked last among the 8 heavens. Whether it's the strength of the upper echelons or the overall strength, it's far weaker than the other 7 heavens. Back then, a stunning genius appeared in the far west, Goddess Luotian. Unfortunately, she was killed by Great Brahma. If Great Brahma didn't kill Goddess Luotian and that great battle didn't happen, perhaps the gap between Great Brahma Heaven domain and the other 7 heavens wouldn't be so big. Chapter 2207. Body Seizing Array. What level is Lord Brahma's cultivation at now? Zhuowen asked. However, Chen Changsheng shook his head and said, I'm not very sure about this. In my opinion, Great Brahma should still be stuck at the comprehension of Death Realm. However, he possesses the heaven-crushing source of the Great Brahma domain and the creation manipulating the heavens. His strength is close to the comprehension of Life Realm. He's not someone an ordinary ninth-step cultivator can compare to. Zhuowen's eyes flashed. He was more and more curious about the heaven-breaking source. It seemed that the heaven-breaking source was indeed powerful. It could allow Lord Brahma, who was only in the enlightenment of Death Realm, to reach the enlightenment of Life Realm. Ordinary cultivators at the ninth step of the void sky could be called Heavenly Lord. This meant that they were the top ruler of their heaven realm. Of course, the difference in strength between heavenly masters was huge. The difference between heavenly masters in the comprehension of death stage might not be huge, but the difference between heavenly masters in the comprehension of death stage and heavenly masters in the comprehension of life stage and life and death stage was huge. It could be said that if an enlightenment of Life Realm Heavenly Lord wanted to kill an enlightenment of Death Realm Heavenly Lord, it would be as easy as flipping a hand. However, the other domains have a lot more ninth-step cultivators than the Great Brahma domain. The strongest domain, the Sakyamuni domain, has 10 ninth-step cultivators on the surface. As for whether there are more in secret, I don't know. Chen Changsheng added. What about the Huaxia domain? Zhuowen thought of the unfathomable Taiching and couldn't help but ask. Chen Changsheng's gaze was solemn, but he shook his head and said, I'm not very clear about the heavenly region of Huaxia, but I know that the heavenly region of Huaxia is very mysterious and very low-key, but I know that Great Brahma is extremely afraid of the heavenly region of Huaxia. It can be seen that the heavenly region of Huaxia is not simple. Zhuowen nodded inwardly. With Taiching's personality, he wouldn't act in a high-profile manner. However, this didn't mean that the Huaxia domain was weak. On the contrary, this kind of power that didn't show its strength was what they needed to be wary of. Since Taiching dared to make a bet with Sakyamuni, it was clear that Taiching and Huaxia Tianyuan had the power to face off against Sakyamuni. However, what surprised Zhuowen was that from Chen Changsheng's words, it seemed that the Great Brahma domain was not only the worst, but also the gap between it and the other 7 heavenly domains was huge. In the Great Brahma domain, only the ruler of the heaven domain had the 9 steps void sky. On the other hand, the Nti Shiva domain had 10 heavenly lords on the surface, but they definitely had a few more in the dark. The difference was not small at all. I've heard that one can become a heaven-crushing elite after gathering all 8 heaven-crushing essences. If the Great Brahma realm is so weak, why haven't the other heavens attacked it yet? Zhuowen asked. Chen Changsheng had a strange expression, and he said, gathering heaven-crushing essences is only a rumor, and I don't know if it's true or not. As for the other heavens attacking it, it would be a huge blow, and none of them would dare to do so. After all, if one of the heavens attacked another, the other heavens would definitely attack as well. At that time, all 8 heavenly domains would descend into chaos. The rulers of the 8 heavenly domains have already come to an agreement, but I don't know what exactly it is. Zhuowen's eyes slowly narrowed upon hearing this, but he sighed softly in his mind. He knew far too little about the 8 heavenly domains. However, only the higher-ups of the 8 heavenly domains would know about this, and he hadn't come into contact with this level of knowledge. After learning that Chen Changsheng didn't know much, Zhuowen didn't plan on asking any further. He knew that even if he continued to ask, he wouldn't be able to get any more information out of him. You can enter first. Zhuowen waved his sleeve, and a green vortex appeared. This was the entrance to the Kanglan mystery realm. Chen Changsheng hesitated for a moment, but he could only grit his teeth and enter. Right now, he was Zhuowen's servant. If Zhuowen wanted him dead, he wouldn't be able to resist at all. After Chen Changsheng left, Zhuowen took out 9 beast bone formation plates and quickly set up a powerful defensive formation. After doing all this, he took out the small temple. At this moment, the small temple was filled with the rich power of faith, and the souls inside were basically all living and working peacefully in the small temple. Although this small temple wasn't very big, it contained a small world inside. With Zhuowen's current cultivation level, creating a small world suitable for souls to live in wasn't a difficult task. However, there was a soul inside that was unique, and Zhuowen wasn't unfamiliar with this soul. It was the soul of the dead spirit. Zhuowen waved his hand and grabbed the dead spirit's soul. The dead spirit's eyes were as calm as water. When Zhuowen secretly grabbed his soul, the dead spirit had already guessed that Zhuowen definitely had something to ask him. Now tell me, why do you think that I'm of the same race as that king? Zhuowen said indifferently. The dead spirit sneered again and again. Now that I've already become like this, what's the difference between me and death? Now you want to get information out of me? No way, I'd rather take this secret into my coffin than tell you. Zhuowen frowned and said indifferently, you should be thanking me. If your soul doesn't die, your body can be reconstructed. And once your soul is destroyed, what's the use of reconstructing your body? You still have a chance. The dead spirit's pupils shrank, but he fell into deep thought. Zhuowen was right. If his soul was still there, he could indeed reconstruct his body. Right now, he still had a chance to live. I'll give you 3 breaths of time. After saying that, Zhuowen began to count, and the dead spirit's frown deepened. In the end, he sighed and said, I can tell you the reason, but you have to promise me that you absolutely can't kill me, and you have to help me reconstruct my body. Zhuowen nodded and swore to the heavenly Tao, I'm willing to swear to the heavenly Tao that as long as you're willing to tell me the truth, once I, Zhuowen, leave this bone world, I'll help you reconstruct your body. The dead spirit nodded. In this world, who wanted to die? If there was a way to live, no one would be willing to die like this. Can you tell me now? Zhuowen looked at the dead spirit and said indifferently. The dead spirit pondered for a moment and said, the reason why I said you're very dangerous is because I felt another formation in the sealed area. That formation wasn't the sealing formation, but another kind of formation. At that time, I was too excited when I discovered the sealed land. In addition, the Great Formation did not have much of an effect on me. Thus, I did not pay much attention to it. However, after thinking about it, I suddenly remembered that the Great Formation was a great formation for possession. Due to the fact that the aura of the Great Possession Formation and the Great Sealing Formation are completely different, I was able to discover it immediately. Furthermore, after a careful investigation, I discovered that the Great Possession Formation was also sealed by the Great Sealing Formation. I believe that you know better than me what this means. Speaking up to here, the dead spirit looked at Zhuowen with deep meaning. Zhuowen's eyes immediately darkened. How could he not understand the dead spirit's meaning? Since the Possession Grand Array was sealed together with the Sealing Grand Array, it meant that the Possession Grand Array might have been set up in the Sealing Grand Array before the Sealing Grand Array was set up. Or it could be said that the Possession Grand Array was secretly set up after the Devouring King was sealed in the Sealing Grand Array. No matter what it was, Zhuowen knew that the Devouring King probably didn't have any good intentions. Of course, the truth of the dead spirit's words was still up for debate. Since the dead spirit said that the sealed area had the aura of the Possession Formation, when Zhuowen returned to the Bone Halberd tribe, he would definitely check it out. Chapter 2208. Deceit Jr. I'm afraid that this king's divine sense won't be able to hold on for much longer. Wait until the Bone Halberd tribe's sea of flames disappears, then bring the phagocytosis to the corpse heavenly road to find me. I've already prepared the entrance for you. As long as you have the phagocytosis, you can enter. The Devourer King's weak voice resounded in Zhuowen's mind, but it quickly weakened and eventually disappeared. Zhuowen knew that the Devourer King's divine sense that was attached to the phagocytosis had been completely wiped out by the Sea of Flames. Thinking of this, Zhuowen stood up and immediately rushed towards the ruins of the Bone Halberd tribe. When Zhuowen arrived at the ruins of the Bone Halberd tribe, the green Sea of Flames was still burning fiercely. Zhuowen didn't approach it casually. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the periphery and arranged a defensive array, then began to refine the remaining death chi. The death chi he obtained from the seven-headed bone flower was extremely powerful. Zhuowen knew that as long as he could successfully refine this death chi, its power would definitely be enough to kill without leaving a trace. However, Zhuowen regretted that the thin needles refined from the death chi could only be used once. In other words, after using it once, it couldn't be used again. It could be said that the Death Chi thin needles were Zhuowen's trump card. If used well, he could silently kill experts below the late stage of the Void Sky 8th step. If used at a critical moment, it could even deal a fatal blow to an expert at the peak of the Void Sky 8th step. Zhuowen discovered that the effects of refining the power of faith were too good. It was many times better than using the divine flames. He planned to use the power of faith to refine treasures in the future. After 10 days, Zhuowen finally refined all the Death Chi in the black cube. As for the Death Chi, it had been completely refined into 20 thin needles, which Zhuowen hid in his spiritual space as a powerful trump card. After refining the death energy, Zhuowen raised his head to look at the Sea of Fire above the ruins of the Bone Halberd tribe. He found that the Sea of Fire was much weaker than before. It should be completely extinguished soon. Zhuowen waited for another 3 days before the raging Sea of Fire in the sky gradually weakened and finally disappeared. Zhuowen leaped up. The moment the Sea of Flames disappeared, he rushed to the phagocytosis's side and grabbed it. At this moment, the phagocytosis's radiance was extremely dim, and its aura was much weaker than before. Zhuowen scanned the phagocytosis with his divine senses and discovered that the interior of the phagocytosis was densely packed with restrictions. It was completely different from what Devour King had given him. Zhuowen knew that the 8,999 seals that had been refined by Devour King had returned to their original state due to him using a secret technique. The seals inside were now back to 9,999. Moreover, as the Devour King's divine sense disappeared from the phagocytosis, Zhuowen knew that the phagocytosis was actually an ownerless object. If Zhuowen wanted to refine it now and leave a mark on it, he could do it. However, Zhuowen didn't refine the phagocytosis. Instead, he took out the small temple and summoned the soul of the dead spirit. He had to determine if Devouring King was plotting something against him. If Devouring King was plotting something against him, Zhuowen wouldn't feel guilty even if he refined the Devouring Seal. Of course, if Devour King really wanted to let Zhuowen leave the Bone World, Zhuowen wouldn't take away the phagocytosis that originally belonged to Devour King. Dead Spirit, point me to the location of the possession array, Zhuowen said indifferently. Dead Spirit didn't waste any time. After observing the surroundings, he waved his sleeve and instantly flew to the center of the Bone Halberd tribe's ruins. He said to the ruins beneath his feet, "It's here. Your level of array Dao isn't bad. You should be able to sense the aura of the possession array with just a little deduction." Zhuowen arrived behind Dead Spirit and waved his sleeve. The ruins beneath Dead Spirit's feet were immediately cleared. Zhuowen then took out 9 beast bone array discs and had them hover around him as he silently deduced the aura below. After half an hour, Zhuowen suddenly opened his eyes. He grabbed Dead Spirit's soul with his right hand and said coldly, "I didn't sense any aura of the possession array." "You're lying to me." Dead Spirit's eyes shrank. He couldn't help but scream, "Impossible. I clearly sensed the aura of the possession array. I can't be wrong. Let me deduce it." Zhuowen slightly frowned. He released Dead Spirit and coldly stared at the latter. "Then, you do it." Dead Spirit's eyes were solemn. He flew to the cleared ruins and continuously performed hand seals to deduce the possession array. But soon, Dead Spirit's face turned pale. He muttered, "Impossible. I clearly sensed the aura of the possession array here. It can't be wrong." Zhuowen was skeptical. Just as he was about to approach Dead Spirit, an invisible ripple blocked his chest. Then, Zhuowen let out a muffled groan and couldn't help but explode backwards. At the same time, Dead Spirit was like a cool breeze as it quickly flew into the distance. Its speed was so fast that by the time Zhuowen reacted, he could no longer see the figure of Dead Spirit. "This bastard, he really is lying to me," Zhuowen coldly snorted, but did not chase after him. Instead, he formed a seal with his right hand, and the originally fleeing Dead Spirit let out a blood-curdling scream before disappearing into thin air. This undead spirit was as cunning as a fox. Zhuowen had always been on guard against this old fellow, so when he took the old fellow's soul into the small temple, he had already secretly done something to his body. If this undead spirit did not play any tricks, Zhuowen would naturally not act rashly. However, if this undead spirit played any tricks, Zhuowen would definitely not be polite. What this undead spirit said should be 70% true and 30% false. Although I still don't know what kind of person the Devouring King is, you still have to be careful. Xiao Hei appeared beside Zhuowen at some point and said in a deep voice, I know about this. Zhuowen nodded. He was no longer the brat from before. After experiencing so many hardships and dangers, Zhuowen's mind had long since become extremely mature and experienced. He would no longer be like a newborn calf. If that Devouring King is benevolent and righteous, I, Zhuowen, will naturally stay away from him. If he is not benevolent and righteous, then don't blame me, Zhuowen, for playing some tricks. Zhuowen's eyes flickered. Immediately after, he took out the phagocytosis. Using the power of faith as a medium, he began to constantly refine the phagocytosis. At the same time, as the restrictions within the phagocytosis were constantly being refined by Zhuowen, Zhuowen imitated the method of setting up the corresponding restrictions. It had to be said that the power of faith was truly an expert at refining. Zhuowen had observed the restrictions within the phagocytosis before. The methods were extremely profound, and the further one went, the more complicated and powerful the restrictions became. Chapter 2209. Awakening the Bloodline. Zhuowen spent 3 months refining the 1,000 restrictions within the phagocytosis. Zhuowen then used his mastery of the array Dao to imitate and set up the 1,000 restrictions within the phagocytosis. The aura of these restrictions was almost identical to the first 1,000 restrictions within the phagocytosis. If the Devouring King hadn't refined the phagocytosis immediately, he wouldn't have been able to discover the problem with the first 1,000 restrictions. Zhuowen was certain that the Devouring King would only spend time refining the phagocytosis after letting him leave. Therefore, before Zhuowen left, he wasn't worried that the Devouring King would discover that the phagocytosis had been tampered with. Once Zhuowen left the bone world, he wouldn't have to worry about the Devouring King finding trouble with him. After all, once he left, the Devouring King wouldn't be able to find trouble with him for a while. At that time, the Devouring King would only need to erase all traces of Zhuowen. Of course, if the Devouring King went back on his word, Zhuowen would have no choice but to give him a taste of his own medicine. It's time to return to the corpse path. Zhuowen glanced at the ruins of the Bone Halberd tribe. There was no reluctance in his eyes as he directly left. After leaving the Bone Halberd tribe, Zhuowen arrived at the mountain range where he had emerged from the corpse path. He held the phagocytosis in his hand. Immediately, the originally dim phagocytosis began to emit a dense black light. Immediately after, a suction force surged out from the phagocytosis. Shortly after, a black vortex appeared above Zhuowen. Zhuowen knew that this was the entrance to the corpse path, so he entered without any hesitation. When Zhuowen opened his eyes, he was already on the boundless bone staircase. He raised his head and looked at the blurry image at the end of the staircase. Zhuowen did what he did last time. He revealed Devour's true body and roared at the end of the staircase. Invisible ripples appeared at the end of the staircase. The blurry image became clearer as Zhuowen jumped inside. What appeared in front of Zhuowen was the familiar bone palace. After entering the depths of the palace, the sloppy Devouring King was still sitting cross-legged in front of the chessboard. His hands and feet were chained up. Haha. Junior, you've done well. If it weren't for your help, I wouldn't have been able to get rid of my biggest problem. Devouring King slowly stood up and warmly invited Zhuowen to sit in front of him. After Zhuowen sat down, he smiled and said, Senior, you must be joking. Helping Senior is what we agreed on. How could this kid break his promise? Devouring King nodded as though he was satisfied with Zhuowen's answer. He smiled and said, Junior, it's time to return the phagocytosis, right? Zhuowen's eyes flickered. He smiled and handed the phagocytosis to Devouring King, saying, I forgot. Please forgive me, Senior. Devouring King received the phagocytosis and examined it carefully. He laughed and said, Junior, you're too polite. I heard from the dead spirit that your name is Zhuoan, right? Is that your human name? Zhuoan nodded. Devouring King smiled and said, then I'll call you Zhuo Xiaoyu from now on. Since you've helped me get rid of the dead spirit, I can't not show any gratitude. I've promised to awaken the royal bloodline in your body. Are you willing? Of course, I'm willing. However, before I awaken the royal bloodline, I have a small request. Zhuoan smiled. Say it. There's no need to be so distant between us. Devouring King flicked his sleeves and said, Junior wants to leave this place. I'm sure Senior has known about this since the beginning. My main purpose in coming to the corpse heavens is to leave the skeleton world, Zhuoan said. Devouring King nodded and said, this king naturally knows about this. Since the dead spirit has been removed, the seal won't be able to suppress this king for long. Once this king breaks free from the seal, I'll naturally bring you out of the skeleton world. Zhuoan's heart sank. What he meant was to leave the skeleton world immediately. He didn't want to stay with someone as dangerous as Devouring King, let alone wait for the Devouring King to break free from the seal. He was clear that Devouring King's strength was terrifying. If the seal was broken, with Zhuoan's current strength, it would be a little difficult for him to fight against Devouring King. Therefore, he couldn't wait for Devouring King to break free from the seal. Senior, you've misunderstood my meaning. What I mean is that I want to leave this place now, Zhuoan said indifferently. Devouring King squinted his eyes and carefully sized up Zhuoan. He smiled and said, why are you in such a hurry to leave the skeleton world? Is there something urgent in the outside world? I don't think so, right? After all, you're not a real human. It's impossible for you to have any relationship with the human race. Zhuoan's eyes turned gloomy. He said coldly, Senior, don't tell me you don't want to let me out. I'll be honest with you. I've been living in the 8 heavens for a long time as a human. After so many years, I've also established my own force. Now that I've suddenly disappeared, my force will definitely be in danger. I won't let that happen because that force was created by me. Devouring King fell silent. He seriously sized up Zhuoan. After confirming that Zhuoan wasn't lying, he smiled and said, so that's how it is. Since that's the case, this king won't stop you. However, before you leave, this king will fulfill his promise and awaken the royal bloodline in your body. Zhuoan looked at Devouring King and hesitated for a moment. Finally, he nodded. Seeing that Zhuoan had agreed, Devouring King revealed a satisfied look. He waved his sleeve and a huge blood-red array appeared on the bone wall behind him. The patterns on the blood-red array were complicated and ever-changing. If one looked at it carefully, they might feel dizzy. Clearly, this array wasn't ordinary. This is the Royal Bloodline Awakening Array. It's an array that has been passed down for generations in our Devouring clan. Normally, only Devouring King controls it. You're lucky to have met me, little guy. After saying that, Devouring King looked at Zhuoan and gestured for Zhuoan to go over. Zhuoan pondered and slowly walked over. His divine sense carefully observed the blood-red array in front of him. After confirming that there was nothing wrong with it, he took a step forward. I'm going to start the bloodline awakening ceremony now. You can't move recklessly. Otherwise, you'll hurt your foundation, Devouring King said solemnly. Zhuoan didn't say anything. He just looked at Devouring King in silence. However, he was still on guard in his heart. Devouring King formed a seal with both hands. During this period, the creaking sounds of the chains colliding were especially ear-piercing. Chapter 22:10. The true purpose. The moment the blood-red light burst out, the blood-red formation began to spin rapidly. Soon after, Zhuoan felt the blood in his entire body start to boil, like boiling water that was constantly surging and rolling, and an unprecedented wave of heat came from his body. The blood-red patterns on the blood-red formation behind Zhuoan were peeled off, piercing into Zhuoan's body like blood needles. Zhuoan could clearly feel that Devour's blood was turning from red to gold under the stimulation of the blood needles. An aura stronger than Devour's was overflowing with the blood. It seemed like something extremely powerful was awakening in Devour's body. Zhuo Wen naturally discovered the source of this aura, and his eyes slowly narrowed. If he had been wary of this bloodline awakening ceremony at the beginning, now that he felt this powerful aura of awakening, he actually believed it a little. He could clearly feel that as his blood turned gold, Devour was transforming. When all of his blood turned gold, Devour's transformation would be complete. Zhuowen quietly sensed Devour's transformation, and he couldn't help but feel happy. Time flew. In the blink of an eye, 10 days had passed since the ceremony began. During these 10 days, the blood-red formation had been stimulating Devour's body, making him transform continuously. Zhuo Wen could clearly feel that Devour's power had increased imperceptibly during his transformation. Of course, he knew that it wasn't the main effect of the transformation. It was his bloodline. He knew that Devour's bloodline was much stronger than the ordinary bloodline. Perhaps, he would have a heaven-defying innate talent. On the 15th day, more than 90% of Devour's blood had turned gold. As his bloodline continued to awaken, Zhuowen couldn't suppress the restlessness in his heart. He directly revealed Devour's real body. Fortunately, Devour was prepared. He controlled the power of the formation, forcibly shrinking Devour's body to the size of several meters. If one looked carefully, one could see that the scales on Devour's real body weren't black anymore. Instead, they were faintly golden. Each of Devour's scales had a golden pattern, which looked strange. Every time Zhuowen's eyes fell on the golden pattern, he could feel a sharp aura. It was as if what appeared in front of him wasn't an ordinary scale, but a peerless sharp blade. Without a doubt, the defensive power of Devour's scales was many times stronger than before. Little friend Zhuo, once the bloodline in your body has completely transformed, you will become a true member of the royal family. Now, there is only 10% left. This 10% is the most crucial step. You cannot resist in any way. Otherwise, all your previous efforts will be wasted. At this moment, Devour King suddenly spoke, his voice solemn. Zhuowen's eyes also became serious. His eyes flickered, but he eventually nodded and said, "Senior, don't worry. As long as my royal bloodline is truly awakened, this Zhuo will cooperate unconditionally." Devour King nodded. His right hand formed a claw, and a black mist gushed out from his hand, turning into a giant claw that grabbed at Zhuowen's head. Zhuowen looked at the giant claw silently. He felt that something was wrong, but when he recalled Devour King's words, he forced himself to stand still and didn't move. The moment the giant claw landed on Zhuowen's head, it shrank to the size of an ordinary person. Then, it grabbed onto Zhuowen's head. A vast and powerful force came from the claw, invading Zhuowen's spiritual space. This force was extremely invasive. As soon as it entered Zhuowen's spiritual space, it rampaged and rushed towards his spiritual space. Zhuowen was caught off guard and spat out a mouthful of blood, his face incomparably pale. "Senior, what is the meaning of this? This has nothing to do with the royal bloodline awakening, right?" Zhuowen was shocked. He couldn't help but roar at Devour King, who had a gloomy look in his eyes. Unfortunately, Devour King didn't pay any attention to Zhuowen. Instead, he focused on controlling the claw that was grabbing onto Zhuowen's head, causing the force that invaded the depths of Zhuowen's spiritual sea to go deeper and invade. Zhuowen's heart sank. He recalled what Undead Spirit had said before. This Devour King really didn't have any good intentions. Fortunately, the force that invaded Zhuowen's spiritual space didn't do anything after entering the deepest part of his spiritual sea. Instead, it stopped there. However, the invading force continued to release pitch-black rays of light that affected Zhuowen's body like invisible ropes. Zhuowen was bound to the ground, unable to move. Asterisk clang. Asterisk the sound of chains colliding rang out. Zhuowen's gaze couldn't help but fall on Devour King. Devour King slowly stood up and walked towards Zhuowen with a smile on his face. "What is the meaning of this?" Zhuowen asked with a gloomy look. Devour King didn't seem to mind. He said, "Zhuo Xiaoyu, we've reached the most crucial step of the bloodline awakening. I need to restrict your movements. Otherwise, if you move recklessly, the bloodline awakening might fail." After saying that, Devour King formed a seal with both hands. Instantly, a black formation half the size of the blood-red formation appeared in the center of the bone spear. The moment the black formation appeared, Zhuowen felt the aura of the black formation. His pupils involuntarily shrank. He said in a deep voice, "Possession formation?" At this moment, Zhuowen was both shocked and furious. It seemed that Undead Spirit was right. Devour King really did set up a possession formation in the sealed land. However, Undead Spirit had clearly said that he could feel the aura of the possession formation in the sealed land. Why didn't he feel anything when he was deducing it earlier? However, the only explanation now was that Devour King had hidden the possession formation beforehand. That was why he didn't sense the aura of the possession formation in the ruins of the Bone Halberd tribe. "You want to possess me?" Zhuowen looked at Devour King with a gloomy look. Devour King sized up Zhuowen and smiled faintly. "Zhuo Xiaoyu, your words are a little misleading. This king only wants to exchange bodies with you. I'm not trying to possess you. I'm just exchanging bodies." Zhuowen's gaze turned even gloomier. He said, "You want to complete the last 10% of the bloodline awakening after possessing me?" Devour King grinned and didn't deny it. Clearly, he was planning as Zhuowen had guessed. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.